What is up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in. My name is Dodger, and today I want to do a kind of comprehensive set review of the new upcoming Magic set, Zendikar Rising. This is hopefully the first in a long line of set reviews. I ideally want to do this for new canon Magic sets as they come out, and I'm also looking to do this for some custom Magic sets that are not yet currently in the MSEM format, so hopefully you guys can look forward to that. Today I'm trying out kind of a new outline format for how I want to do the set reviews. One thing that like most set reviews do is they'll just kind of go card by card, starting with the white cards and the blue cards, black cards, etc. What I'm going to do is first I'm going to talk about the set holistically. So I'm going to go over the lore, and then the mechanics, and then like some limited archetypes, and like my general thoughts on the limited environment. And then what I'm going to do for the constructed section is I'm just going to take a list of all the cards that I think are worth talking about for constructed, and I'm going to literally do it in a random order. So I just like procedurally generated a random list of the cards, or like a random permutation of the cards that I already had selected, and then I'm going to just go in that order. And then if you guys want to like access a certain part of the video, or you want to skip around, or you want to find like wherever I talk about your favorite card or whatever, there will be links for timestamps either in the description or in a pinned comment. So look for that below if you're interested. Otherwise, feel free to sit back. I hope that this is like an interesting like sort of format for like kind of adapting and evolving how these set reviews are done, and I hope you enjoy. Yeah, so I'm just going to get started right now. So just a little bit about me first. I am a longtime Magic player, longtime Magic fan. I've been playing since Zendikar in 2009, so it's been about 11 years, which is like now more than half of my life, which is crazy. About me, I am mostly a Johnny Spike, which means that I like playing to win, but I also like doing so with cards and combinations that most people don't really utilize. So also I saw a little bit of my like competitive credentials. I'm obviously not a pro. I'm not like some big like influencer or anything. I do have 2 Grand Prix top 64s, I believe, from like 5-6 years ago. So I do have like some amount of competitive success, but I'm not an expert, so this is just like my thoughts. I really enjoy talking about Magic cards and thinking about Magic, so this is mostly like an outlet of expression for me, and as a way for me to go through my thought process on the cards, and also a way to hopefully for you guys, get some extra insight on the set and figure out what you might want to build around or not build around. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to go over before we get started, sorry. I already went over the outline. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the major lore hits of the set. So if you aren't familiar with Zendikar, Zendikar is a plane where everything is in chaos all the time. There's floating islands, there's these massive like natural disasters, there's like the land's coming alive all the time. There are like these crazy elementals, and there's also a lot of fantastic treasure that is kind of hidden beneath all the danger. And the reason for that, we learned in the original Zendikar block, was because of these massive monsters that were hidden under the surface, the Eldrazi. So one thing that kind of disappointed a lot of people about the Battle for Zendikar block was that it kind of focused a little too much on the Eldrazi. Yes, like obviously the story required that like there was like a battle to reclaim the plane. But I think some people definitely, like myself included, who were fans of the original plane, definitely felt like maybe it was a little too focused on the Eldrazi. There wasn't enough of like the OG Zendikar feel. And I think that if that is something you felt, Zendikar Rising absolutely does bring that. We haven't, as for like the actual story, this is important to note that the Magic story is back to being like weekly online on the Mothership site, which I think is really cool. I always loved it when it was in that format. I won't spoil like everything, so if you want to go read it, like go ahead. But the main gist is there's kind of a dichotomy between old Zendikar and new Zendikar, and which one is better, which one like people should be looking to rebuild towards in the wake of the Eldrazi being defeated. And you kind of get like you get on the one side, Nahiri is someone who is a very old Zendikari. She was one of the original 3 who actually imprisoned the Eldrazi in the first place, and she is after some sort of secret power that allows her to kind of put the royal to sleep. But what that's going to do is it's actually going to shut off a lot of the elementals that have kind of made a home of Zendikar, and this is something that Nissa, the other one of the other main characters for the story, is kind of against, because like she feels a very deep connection to the land. And then as well, Jace is going to be involved in the story. Nissa ended up seeking out Jace for help. So we're going to see how like these 3 kind of interact in the future as more stories come out. Anyway, so that's just like a general overview of the lore. But I think most people are pretty familiar with the world of Zendikar overall. It's one of the more popular plans. Okay, let's talk about the mechanics. So the first new mechanic returning in Zendikar is Landfall. Landfall is a pseudo keyword that triggers whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. This has been in both the original Zendikar block and the Battle for Zendikar block, so people should know what it does. There have been many powerful cards with Landfall over the course of Magic's history, and I think that Zendikar Rising definitely is no exception. I'm very glad it's back. It doesn't really feel like Zendikar without Landfall to me, so I'm very glad to see it return. And they definitely ratchet up the power a little bit compared to BFZ, because BFZ block, the Landfall cards were pretty weak overall. So I'm happy to see it, yeah. Next up, we have these kind of modal double face cards, or I'll abbreviate them MDFC from now on. And MDFCs, they're very interesting because you can actually play them either as a regular card on the front, or when you play them, you can just choose to play them as a land. This kind of flexibility is very, very valuable, I think, and actually does a lot to like kind of add a lot of hidden power to the cards. I think that these cards are actually going to end up being a lot better than you think, and we'll see how that works when I get to them in my constructed review. But for limited, these are also very, very, very good picks, because having like a solid card that you can also just play as a land when you need it, like it makes a lot more early hands keepable, and it allows you to keep hitting your landfall triggers when you want to. And that's something that's going to be very important, given that in the OG Zendikar block, you often wanted to play limited decks with 18, 19 lands just to make sure that you hit your land drops every turn. Okay, so our next returning mechanic is going to be Kicker. Kicker is an old favorite. It is essentially the classic mechanic, and it's often, designers like to joke that like, oh, every mechanic is just a Kicker variant, right? Why would you ever use any mechanic other than Kicker? And it was also in the original Zendikar, and I'm very glad it's back. Something Kicker does is it allows you to print base effects, but kind of give an inherent scaling element that allows you to have very powerful effects on actual commons, because like if you scale the Kicker cost appropriately, like it can be appropriately powered for a common, but still allow for some really big limited moments, or some really, really big power moments coming from commons and limited, which I think is really cool. Not only that, it's just like, it's fun to see Kicker cards be good in Standard and other constructed formats, because there's a lot of gameplay to like when you want to play your Kicker spell and if it's worth saving your Kicker card for later. One card that I always thought was very neat was like when I was reading about like old Standard formats and how a card like Kavu Titan was actually one of the best creatures back in its day for Standard. Even though like it's literally just a Grizzly Bear or a 5-mana 5/5, neither of which would have been playable on their own. But when you put them together on the same card, that's where you get a lot of a lot of cool mileage out of that. So I thought that's very interesting. There's a lot of support for like specifically cards with kicker abilities in Zendikar Rising, and I hope that it can get there to some capacity, because it's one of my favorite mechanics. Now let's move on to the final mechanic in the set, Party. This is my favorite mechanic that they're introducing here, and there's just a lot of things to talk about with this mechanic. Basically what it is your party is like a group of up to 4 creatures you control, and it consists of 1 wizard, 1 cleric, 1 warrior, and 1, which one did I miss? Rogue, yeah. So this is kind of representing the classic D&D party, which consists of like one of each of those classes. And what this does is it kind of really reinforces how Zendikar is an adventure world. I really love this. It feels very Zendikar, but it's also very unique in that it's not like relating to land or anything. What this mechanic actually does is it encourages, since there are a lot of like cards that can actually be very powerful if you are reliably enabling party, it actually encourages you to look at a lot of old cards in a new light. In standard, even in formats like Pioneer or Modern, being able to enable these party cards with certain old cards that maybe they didn't always succeed, but if you can slot them into the right deck, suddenly this random old white rogue from whatever old set is actually going to play a big part in my deck. Now, obviously, it's not guaranteed this kind of thing will happen, but it definitely does have the potential, and that's something that I'm very excited about. And the other thing is that if you're drafting this in Limited, one thing I really love about Party, as opposed to most tribal mechanics, is that most tribal mechanics, they're kind of you just kind of go all in, right? It's okay, I'm drafting goblins. This, if you're in Lorwyn or whatever, or if you're in Ixalan, it's okay, I'm drafting pirates, But this way, you actually kind of get a lot more play out of, or less repetitive play out of a draft format that uses the party mechanic, because you're what you want to draft and your evaluation cards changes a lot, because okay, I already have a lot of clerics, then maybe I don't want to draft this really good cleric, even though I already have some amount of that. If you're drafting for party, that is. And there's also just straight up class tribal in the set in small amounts, so you can also just draft for that. So it kind of makes for an interesting dichotomy of whether you can try to shoot the moon for a lot of one class, or you just want to do a little bit of everything. So I think that overall, very solid mechanical lineup. And speaking of Limited, we're actually going to talk about Limited for a little bit in this next section. So see you on the other side. Cool. So this is part 2 of the Zendikar Rising set review, basically where we're just going to be going over the Limited archetypes. And I'm going to make this pretty quick. Basically, what I'm just going to touch on are the gold the gold archetype uncommons for each color pair, and then how these archetypes should play out, what commons to look out for in general. So nothing too in depth. I will give my thoughts on the Limited format in general at the end a little bit, but I'm definitely going to mostly stick to the constructed review, so this should not be too long, I think. And if you want to skip this section, just go to the constructed parts. You can look for the timestamps in the description. Cool. So to get that started, in this set, there are 4 class tribes, right? There's warriors, there's rogues, there's wizards, and there are clerics. So each of those has a tribal color pair, where you can generally, if you want to draft around a particular tribe, you can do that. There are also 2 party color pairs, and then the other color pairs are going to be based around 7. So without further ado, let's get started. White-blue, the Archon is Spoils of Adventure, which gives you a very big payoff for having a full party. If you actually get this to cost 2 mana, it's going to be a very big tempo play. Not only are you drawing 3 cards for 2 mana, you're also getting 3 life out of it. I think that if you're getting this down to at least 4 mana, it should be very playable in draft. And even 5 mana is like not the worst play ever. Like a 5 mana concentrate is not ideal, but it's not horrible. Besides that, like there's really not a lot of payoff you need to make this like at least serviceable in draft. And if you're ever getting it to 3 or less, like that's absolutely busted, right? So that means that your blue-white party deck is definitely going to be a bit slower. You're going to be looking to set up and kind of like control the board. And then you can get big payoffs early, like later on in the curve. Cards like Shepherd of Heroes can help you stabilize. Kabir Outrider giving you a big, pretty big buff on like a reasonable Hill Giant body. Seafloor Stalker can be a good finisher. You can play earlier, and then you can actually just get in with it like for not very much mana if you do have a full party. Finally, Cascade Seer giving you a nice scry. So again, we're kind of looking at like the payoffs for this archetype to be in like the 4 or 5 cost range. And that means besides that, you probably want to draft a lot of cheaper, just like enablers for this archetype. So next up, blue-black is the Rogues color, or the Rogues color pair. And generally every archetype has like a certain extra theme to how they play beyond just like, okay, have a bunch of this archetype, right? And so for Rogues, they're going to be about milling the opponent, right? So let's take a look at Soaring Thought Thief. Soaring Thought Thief is actually a very interesting card. The body already is a 2 mana 1/3 flash flyer, which is like already pretty above the curve for limited. But then being able to not only give all of your rogues +1/+0 if you've milled them 8 or more cards, but also being able to like kind of help you get there by milling your opponent whenever you attack with rogues. So I think that this card is definitely very, very strong, and it's going to be the centerpiece of like a rogues archetype for drafting. Generally, you want to be like kind of keeping up the pressure, running like a tempo-oriented strategy, and some cards like Zulaport Duelist will help you win combats for very cheap, while also making a rogue and even milling your opponent out a little bit. Anti-Cognition is a solid counterspell that becomes like a very powerful counterspell if you've already milled your opponent enough. Nemana Skitter Sneak is kind of the top of your rogue curve usually. You probably don't want to go higher than 4. But having a 4/4 menace as a payoff is very, very good. Finally, Nemana Skydancer, again getting another flash threat. This lets you incorporate cards like Anti-Cognition into your deck a lot better, and this also does mill 2 cards by itself. So in general, blue-black rogues look to be on the offensive, using like a tempo-oriented game plan, lots of cheap rogues, making tricky plays, and then milling your opponent out kind of incidentally. The black-red archetype is also a party archetype, like blue-white, but black-red is definitely going to be a bit more low curve. You're going to be looking to kind of curve out and smash the opponent as quickly as possible. The Archon for black-red is Ravager's Mace. Ravager's Mace is the first of these kind of equipment that we're seeing in this set that attach automatically to a creature when you play them, which basically makes them auras with upside, because you don't have to play them and then equip them. This can be very, very good, actually. I think Ravager's Mace, in particular, is one of the scarier equipments for limited. Being able to just, like, drop this down, give +2/+0 and Menace is already very, very good. But then it can scale up to 4, and not only that, given that it's equipment, it'll stick around, you'll be able to put it on whatever creature you want. This is definitely a very, very good payoff for the black-red archetype. So generally you want to be playing aggressively and curving out, so some good examples for this are Deadly Alliance can potentially give you like a 3, 2, even 1 mana removal spell if you manage to curve out in the early turns. Malakir Blood Priest is a great 2-drop for the archetype, giving you a cleric on turn 2, or being able to just like drain your opponent out in the late game. So I think Malakir Blood Priest is going to be a big one for that. Grotag Bugcatcher, another solid 2-drop, will attack as at least a 2/2 with trample, but can scale up to being a 5/2 trample if you do have that curve. And then finally, Synchronized Spellcraft, giving you a solid 5 mana removal spell that can also, close out the game again. So I think that a big strength of the black-red archetype is having a lot of reach and being able to close out the game, assuming that you did manage to curve out well. Cool. So red-green is the landfall archetype. Their Archon is Brushfire Elemental. Brushfire Elemental is a plated Geopede with haste, and essentially also has like the Daunt mechanic, so it's a very powerful card. For red-green, you definitely want to be on the aggressive side as well for landfall effects, so you want to be like getting in there, beating down. Akum Hellhound is a great one-drop. It's a red step links, and attacking in with a 2/3 every turn for 1 mana is very, very good. And you're also more likely to be able to hit land drops given that MDFCs exist. Let's see, so Spitfire Lagak, a 4 mana 3/4 is a great body in red, and then also this also helps you close out the game pretty well. Finally, we got Territorial Sidecat, which is a 3 mana 2/1. This one is a little bit dicier, I think. It does scale well, but it's very weak if you don't get it on curve. Like playing this on, if you play this on turn 4 and then play a land, like okay, fine, whatever. But if you draw this on turn 5 or later, this card's going to be pretty weak because you're not going to hit very many more land drops. So maybe this will be like a 3/2 by that point. But if you ever have to use this in combat as just a 2/1, it's very weak. So that means that you probably want this in this archetype because you're probably going to be running more lands and you have more cards that will like benefit from you running more lands. So this card will make more sense. Finally, we've got Canopy Baloth, which is another great mid-range threat. So for green-white, we also have another landfall archetype, but this one is more of a slow, grindy, like build up good creatures and then eventually overwhelm the opponent with your board presence. So the archetype is going to be Maraza Rootgrazer. Maraza Rootgrazer will come down on turn 2. It'll actually be able to ramp you if you want, but it can also help you reuse your landfall abilities in the late game. So this gives you like kind of infinite scaling in that you can like make sure that you never run out of landfall effects as long as this card is around. Plus it's got Vigilance, so it can do those things while also just, getting in and brawling. The card of cards that you want to run in green-white are going to be the slower landfall cards like Kazanu Nectar Pot, which can help you stay alive in the early game while also just like, gaining life in the long run. Kazandu Stomper is kind of a late stage creature that you can drop at turn 6, and then you can actually just, bring a couple lands back and use them again. It's also great for if you maybe played a early MDFC as a land, and then you have enough mana, so you want to use the effect now, so you can go ahead and return that card to your hand. You can do the same thing with Tazim Raptor, which is a Winddrake in white that also lets you bounce a land to your hand if you want. So that's actually a very solid upside, given that you don't actually have to do it. You can just do it if you want. Finally, we have Prowling Felidar, which I mistakenly mentioned earlier. Prowling Felidar coming down on turn 4. This is actually, I think, a better card than the Sidecat for this archetype because you're more likely to, it's more likely to survive a combat the first turn you play it. And if you're playing green-white, you're more likely to actually be able to reuse the effect. And this card, having 3 toughness already, will probably be able to survive longer than the Sidecat, so it'll also just kind of get bigger. That's my thoughts on it. Costing 4 is obviously somewhat of a downside, but I think this card should be pretty solid in the green archetype specifically. Now let's go on to the enemy color archetypes. So we got white-black clerics. The Archon is Cleric of Life's Bond. So clerics will be about gaining life and potentially also having some clerics die and bring them back and keep doing that kind of thing. So Core Celebrant is one cleric that I think is going to be very important because that means whenever you play a cleric, you're going to be able to gain life and trigger all your cleric effects. Shepherd of Heroes, another card that lets you, it's a cleric, it gains your life. It's not like a cleric card per se, but it should fit into the archetype pretty well. It's also a flyer and just a good card. Malakir Blood Priest is another one. It's having cleric that can just gain you life incidentally, and then you probably will be able to drain for 2 or maybe 3, because you probably won't have a deck of all clerics. Finally, Feed the Swarm. Your clerics are probably going to be trading in combat a lot, so having Feed the Swarm to bring them back is going to be great for grinding them out. You also can just use it as a Disentomb if you want, so a very flexible card. Blue-red is about wizards, and wizards are going to be kind of the spell slinger. This is how blue-red almost always plays in limited, but you want to be drafting some wizards, and then your wizards will also usually proc off of playing instants and sorceries. So the Archon is Umara Mystic, which is like one example of that. Having wizards that fit into this archetype are stuff like Expedition Diviner and Tazim Royal Mage. Both of these cards play well with like just having other wizards and spells in your deck. Fissure Wizard lets you come to drop this down turn 2, maybe discard an instant sorcery that you don't care about right now, and then you can bring it back later with Tazim Royal Mage. Finally, I think Royal Eruption. I mean, obviously Royal Eruption is just going to be good in every deck, but being able to play Royal Eruption like early, and then you can actually just bring it back with the Tazim Royal Mage and play it for the kicker in the late game. So these are kind of like all good cards that will fit much better in the Wizards archetype when they mesh together. For Black-Green, this is actually going to be like the most unique archetype for the set, I think. It's actually a +1/+1 counters archetype. So this is the only one that's not really based on a set mechanic per se. The Archon is Moss Pit Skeleton, which is a kicker card, and being able to come down as either a 2/2 or a big creature for 5 mana, which is really great. But you can also keep recurring this if you have a way to keep putting counters on your creatures. And there are plenty of cards that care about putting counters on your creatures. So for example, Hogger Constrictor and Gnarlid Colony both will give either Menace or Trample to your creatures with counters on them. You can also use Oblivion's Hunger as a solid creature protection spell that can even cantrip if you have it on if you target a creature with a counter. Finally, Dauntless Survivor is a solid Grizzly Bear variant that can put a counter on whatever creature you need, and will also can be a big Grizzly Bear if you need it to be. Cool. So let's move on to Red White. Red White is the Warrior tribal color pairing, and the Archon is going to be Kargan War Leader, short and sweet. It's a nice little lord. Kargan War Leader is good, but also Red White kind of has an equipment theme, so there will be some cards like, for instance, Resolute Strike that care about whether or not you have an equipment, or whether you if you're giving a creature +2/+2 and it's a warrior, you can also attach an equipment for free, which can be a very big combat boost potentially, depending on what equipment you're attaching. Another equipment you might want to have in your warrior deck is something like Utility Knife, coming down and instantly attaching to a creature for +1/+1. So this is kind of like a bit of a bad aura, but the aura sticks around and you can equip it later for admittedly a little higher bit of a price. Finally, a couple red cards that might work in this archetype as well. Expedition Champion can be a 3-mana 4/3 if you've got another warrior. So this is the kind of card that's very good in like this archetype, but not that great in like a party deck. And then you've also got Scavenge Blade, which I think is actually being underrated by people a little bit. I think this card is pretty solid, given like comparing it to like Bone Splitter. Obviously, like Bone Splitter is a lot more efficient, but the first play and just playing this costs the same as the first play and equip of Bone Splitter, and then you also like will have. Actually, okay, now that I think about it, it's definitely worse than Bone Splitter, but like it's comparable, at least at first. Yeah, okay. So finally, we've got the blue-green archetype, which is Kicker. Now, this will have a lot of cards that maybe care about cards with Kicker. So one example is Lull Mage's Familiar. This is the Archon for blue-green. It's going to ramp you, which makes it easier to cast your kicked spells, but also it gains you life whenever you do that. And it has a solid body, so it can block and make sure you get that mana. Some fun cards that can go in this archetype. Risen Riptide is obviously a little weak by itself, but being able to turn into a 5/5 whenever you play kick spell means that like if your deck is firing off, this can be a solid finisher for your blue-green deck that you don't have to spend that much mana on initially. Besides that, we've got Cunning Geyser Mage, which is another solid inclusion. Being able to play this as a 3-drop is fine, but then if you drop it on turn 6, it's like, oh, I've got a pretty solid mana war. Obviously, this is like weaker than your mana war is usually going to be, but it's also common, and we haven't really seen a ton of like mana war effects at common anymore. So this is pretty nice to have. Finally, we got a couple other good tricks. Might of Miraza gives you a solid combat trick for 2 mana, but then you can get a very large combat trick, giving +5/+5 if you manage to hit 5 mana with this. And then we've also got Reclaim the Wastes. I think this one is going to be very important because not only is it a kick spell, or it's a kicker spell that you can cast for relatively cheap, at only 4 mana. It can also just it gets you 2 lands, so it helps you maybe hit your landfall triggers, or just getting you more mana so that you can keep casting your kick spells. So those were all the archetypes in the format. I think that in general, Zendikar Rising is a pretty balanced format in terms of just the speed. It's certainly not going to be as fast as original Zendikar, I believe. There's a decent amount of 2-drops that don't really attack well into 3-drops, in my opinion, which means that you're not going to automatically win games just by drafting decks full of 2-drops. And that's something I do like. I don't really like it when draft formats are okay, just draft all the 2-drops and you'll win. So I'm happy that is the thing. But there are a lot of cards at higher mana costs that do a good job of closing out the game, especially the party cards in black-red. So that means that your deck needs to have a solid removal suite to deal with those kind of things. And you also need to be able to stall up the board well, so that means that you won't just die to a single removal spell or a single piece of reach from an aggro deck. So in general, I think that the format's in a pretty good spot. I think Party is going to do a lot to make for some interesting drafts. And I think in general, the effects that each mechanic can have on the format will play together very well. So I'm excited to draft this format quite a bit, and I hope you are too. I'll see you soon in the constructed section. Thanks for listening. All right, so we are now in the constructed section for my ZNR set review. As you may have noticed, I've changed locations a little bit. Hopefully that isn't too much of an issue. Right, so where we left off, I just finished giving my take on limited archetypes for the set, and now what I've done is I've basically just made a list of every single card in the set that I think is worth talking about for constructed, and I have seeded everything randomly, meaning I literally just took my big list and created a random permutation of it. So we're just going to go through every card in a random order. There's literally no rhyme or reason to it. I think this should make it a little more interesting because if you're just going through by collector number, it's okay, we just did all the white cards, now we just did all the blue cards, So this should give a better feeling for the set overall when we're done. If you are interested in looking for a specific card, timestamps for everything will be in the description. Now, as for my method of evaluating the cards themselves, I'm going to be using a sort of rating system, but it's going to be a lot simpler than what reviews like LSVs use or reviews like Limited Resources use. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have 2 categories for these cards. I'm going to categorize everything into either what I think is a sure thing or what I think is a long shot. So sure things are cards that are all-stars. They're just by when you see them, you know that they're going to be showing up in one constructed format or another, and it's just a matter of when, right? So cards that are sure things are usually the most powerful cards in the set, but also they can just be centerpieces of very powerful strategies, or not even centerpieces, just important support pieces for very powerful decks. They could also just be a very good support card. Something like Ponder is definitely a sure thing, even though it's not the most individually powerful card in the game, whereas long shots are cards that I think definitely have the potential to see no play, but I still think that they're worth talking about because they also have potential to be at least solid. And maybe they're cards that are situational, so depending on the meta, long shot cards could be really good, and then some metas long shot cards might just not be that great. Let's go ahead and get started. The first card that we're going to talk about is called Soul Shatter. Soul Shatter is a 3 mana instant which makes each opponent sacrifice the most expensive creature or planeswalker they control. I think that Soul Shatter is definitely a sure thing. This is a very powerful standard card. The best comparison is Crackling Doom from Construct here, which had the same effect, except that it also did 2 damage to each opponent, which is a definite upgrade over this card. But this card is only mono black, so it can go in a lot more decks. being able to be a solid removal spell for probably control decks, but honestly, like, I think there are plenty of like creature-based black decks that would be in the market for like an efficient 3-mana removal spell like this. Now the problem is that it doesn't actually kill necessarily what you want to kill all the time. Maybe there's a low CMC creature that like has some kind of ability that you really need to get rid of, but you can't. In which case, like, this can be kind of annoying. It also can hit planeswalkers, but sometimes like it doesn't hit the enemy planeswalker because maybe they have a creature that's more expensive. So like that can be annoying. One big plus of this card though is that it actually dodges hexproof. So this can let you remove a hexproof threat because it's a sack effect. So it's never even if the opponent has hexproof themselves, it gets around that too. So also a great card for multiplayer. I think this card is very good. Just very solid, flexible removal effect for standard. Let's see, the second card is going to be Luminarch Aspirant. Luminarch Aspirant is a 2-mana 1/1. When at the beginning of combat on your turn, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures. This is a very efficient, or rather, it's a very cheap creature for this kind of effect. And yes, it is only a base 1/1. However, given that it can actually buff itself, you can cast this on turn 2, immediately buff itself to a 2/2, and then this can attack as a 3/3 starting on turn 3, which is kind of crazy for a white card, honestly. White doesn't usually get that kind of efficiency on creatures. Usually this is like a green thing, right? But it doesn't have to just buff itself. You can also play it on turn 2, immediately after a 1-drop, and then like permanently buff your 1-drop. This does it every single turn. I think that this card is definitely a sure thing. Luminarch Aspirant is 100% going to be showing up in Standard. Maybe not now, at some point in the future. I have no doubt. It even has a relevant creature type. Let's see, I believe it is. Yeah, it's a cleric. So I think that, like, because of party considerations, there are going to be plenty of decks based around party that are like, okay, I really need like a good cleric, you know? And this card is just good in almost every deck that has creatures. Because, like, it's even good when it's just buffing itself, you know? I think this card is... So, obviously, like, the 1 toughness on entrance is a fairly big deal. This means that if you're not buffing itself, it will eventually probably die to whatever removal spell your opponent comes up with. And yeah, Dice of Doomblade is kind of a meme, right? But, like, it is worth noting that, like, your creature is not very resilient. Still, if you even get 1/+1/+1 counter off this on one of your other creatures, then like you're okay with it getting removed because you got something out of it already. I think it's quite solid for sure. All right, so our next card is going to be Acquisitions Expert. It is a 2-mana 1/2 rogue. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals a number of cards equal to the number of creatures in your party, and you pick one and they discard it. So this is the first party card that we talked about. And I think this is a very interesting one because the card is actually not that bad, even if you are not doing anything with party at all. Ravenous Rats is essentially like just this with 1 less toughness, and Ravenous Rats has seen play in many different standard formats, you know? Yarok's Fenlurker saw play like last year, and that was, you know, I mean, Yarok's Fenlurker is slightly better than Ravenous Rats, obviously, don't get me wrong. But, like, in a lot of cases, it's just Ravenous Rats. So, I think that even if you're not doing anything with party, there's a world in which this shows up. Rogue is also a relevant creature type if you're trying to build, like, a Rogues deck. This is great to sacrifice after you get value. This is great to recur. This is great for all sorts of things. And now, if you're getting into the party thing, I think Acquisitions Expert is the kind of card... first of all, I'll say... I think Acquisitions Expert is a sure thing. I think this card will definitely be showing up in Standard. I think that it's even possibly might find a spot in some older format decks. I'm hesitant to say Modern Humans for this because Kitesail Freebooter is kind of like a better version of this effect most of the time, although your opponent doesn't actually get the card back, so that is something to consider. One thing I will say is that, like, in Standard, if you get this off for 3 or more, it's essentially just Thoughtseize, because at that point, like, you're gonna be on turn 5 or 6. And so, like, yes, like, Thoughtseize is not as good on turn 5 or 6, but, like, still, usually the cards that are left in your opponent's hand are going to be pretty powerful at that point. So being able to take those is good. And I just feel like the baseline for this is so high that this is actually one of the party cards that I'm more confident in showing up, because it's still just good, even if, like, the party decks aren't really a thing. So yeah, okay, let's move on to Archon of Emeria. All right, so Archon of Emeria is a 3-mana 2/3. It has flying, and each player can't cast more than one spell per turn while it's in play, and also your opponent's non-basic lands will come into play tapped. I think Archon of Emeria is also a sure thing. I think that this is a good combination of effects on a creature that has also, like, pretty reasonable stats. Both of these effects are pretty solid hate for various archetypes and eternal formats. Particularly the second ability, the Rule of Law effect. This is something that, like, you can tutor for this in your green-white creature deck in Modern, and it'll shut off Storm, or whatever other Stormy variant your opponent might be running, right? This can slot into your sideboard while also just, like, you know, it also just slows down your opponent's game plan, because their lands are going to be coming in tapped, and it's just going to have a really solid effect on the game if you're an aggressive white deck. So I could see this definitely showing up in, like, Death and Taxes, maybe even in Court of Calling decks. Hard to say, but this definitely feels more like an Eternal format card than like a standard card. Yeah, so let's see. Moving on to the next card, it's going to be Coral Helm Chronicler. Coral Helm Chronicler is a 3-mana 2/2. Whenever you cast a kick spell, you get to draw a card and then discard a card. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you can reveal any card with a kicker ability and put it in your hand. Now, this card I think it's a sure thing, and here's why. It's mostly because of the second ability, because there are plenty of cards in this set that have kicker and are also just, like, really good cards. So you don't even really need to care about the first ability as long as you have a decent density of kicker cards already in your deck. Because if you have a 3-mana 2/2 that, like, tutors for, or that doesn't tutor for, but impulses for a decent number of cards in your deck, that's good value, especially if your deck can take advantage of the body in some way, like either buffing it, blinking it, sacking it, whatever. I could easily see this in, like, a mid-range blue-black deck or, like, a Sultai deck or something like that. And also, it like, the first ability is not nothing either. Getting free loots off of casting spells is definitely very good. The wizard type, it's relevant. I don't really see a deck caring about party and also playing a ton of kicker spells. So that's a little dicier. I mean, like, some cards do care about wizard specifically too, so maybe that's a thing. I definitely feel like this card is quite strong, though, and I think it should see play in Standard, at the very least. Although I wouldn't bet on it for anything other than Standard. Okay, so next up is going to be Kaza Royal Chaser. And Kaza is a 2-mana flyer. There it is. Okay, so Kaza Royal Chaser is a 2-mana 1/2 flyer with haste. And he has a tap ability. The next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of wizards you controlled as this ability resolves. I would also give this a sure thing. I promise some of these cards I am giving a long shot, but it just happens that the randomizer gave a lot of my first cards sure thing. I think that Kaza is the real deal. Coming down on turn 2 is really important. If this cost more, I would not be as into it, but it can actually ramp you quite a lot if you're curving out with wizards, especially if you have a 1-drop wizard. Because curving a 1-drop wizard into Kaza means that you could potentially cast something that costs 5 on turn 3 in your blue-red deck, which is, like, frankly kind of insane. Now, like, not only that, but this card is also just an aggressive body that you can equip to, you can put counters on him, whatever you want, you know, like, and obviously blue-red is probably not going to put counters on a creature that much, but, you know, like, I think just the fact that you could also just play this and immediately use its ability to discount another spell means that in the late game, this card could be essentially free. I just feel like there's a lot of things that this card can do, and if there's a Wizards deck, this card is absolutely going to see play in it. But it's also just like a fine card by itself, given that if your deck is running enough instant sorceries, this is almost just a mana dork that also has flying. So I'm a big fan of this card for sure. Cool. So the next card is going to be Linvala, Shield of Seagate, and Linvala is a 3-mana 3/3 with flying. It's white and blue. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, you get to choose a non-permanent an opponent controls, and until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So it's essentially a detain effect. I think it literally is a detain effect actually, just not using the actual detain word. You can also sack Linvala to either give all your creatures hexproof or indestructible until the end of turn. So I'm a really big fan of this card. If you are playing a party deck, this is one of the reasons to do that. Being able to constantly lock down something every single turn on your 3/3 flyer is a really big deal. And also, if you're running a party deck that wants to curve out and like drop at least 4 creatures onto the board, right? One of your big concerns is going to be sweepers. So how does Linvala remedy that? Well, you can sack it to give your board indestructible, or you can give it hexproof in case your opponent's trying to exit out your creature. I think that Linvala is really, really great for the party deck. Now, obviously, we're not sure if that deck's going to totally exist, but I think it has a good enough set of support that it totally could. So I'm actually going to give Linvala a sure thing as well. I think that party decks will exist in Standard in some way, shape, or form, and part of that is just because the power level of the Standard format should be decreasing, given that the rotation is happening. So that'll leave some space for some more strategies to maybe get in the door. And I'm a big fan of this card, and I think it's a good enabler for those kind of decks to exist. Okay, next card is going to be Brushfire Elemental. So Brushfire Elemental is the green-red Archon for Zendikar Rising. We talked about it a little bit already. It's a 2-mana 1/1 with haste. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. And it has a landfall ability, so it gets +2/+2 whenever you have a land enter under control. Now, this is plated GOP'd without First Strike, but it does have haste, and it can't be chump blocked, essentially. I think that plated GOP'd was a very strong card in its day because of the existence of fetch lands and the fact that it could very easily attack as a 5/5. So obviously, fetch lands don't exist. We do have Fabled Passage, but it's not in the same density as fetch lands, and it's going to be a little harder to make sure that this attacks as a 5/5. Having haste is nice, but I think that it's not enough to really make up for the kind of losses in enablers. And I think a lot of the landfall enablers are going to be a little too slow to really make your landfall aggro deck work. So I'm not super high on this card. I will give it a long shot. I think that in the future, in Standard, if there is more support, I could see this maybe panning out because the power level is mostly there. I could also see, if you're running a plated GOP deck in Modern, I'm not sure why you would be, but you could, then you probably want this card too. Yeah, okay. Cool, so the next card we're going to talk about is going to be Veteran Adventurer. Now, Veteran Adventurer is a 6-mana, 5/5 with Vigilance, and it is also a Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, and Wizard, in addition to being human. So it can fill whatever slot in your party you want, and then the kicker is it costs 1 less for each creature in your party. So this means this could cost up to 2 mana on a 5/5. So that's obviously really insane. But you do need to actually get the dream party curve for that to work, and it's kind of unlikely. I think if for constructed, this card makes me a lot less excited than it does for limited, because I think in limited this card's absolutely fantastic. For constructed, if you're casting this for 3 or less, I think it's worth it. it's worth the risk of running a 6 mana 5/5 in your deck. If you're casting it for 4, like, yes, that's good, and like if you can cast it for 4, like if you don't really ever have to cast it for 5, then I think this card's like totally fine. However, I think that for green to be in party, you don't have any of the, like, there are 2 really powerful party multicolor creatures, right? And we already talked about one of them. So for you to be in green and doing party stuff, you need a little more incentive. I think this card is definitely really good. If your deck comes together. So maybe that sort of thing could work, and I definitely could see this card being good. But I actually feel like it's not as much of a draw to the party archetype as some of the other cards. So I'm going to give it a long shot. Okay. Next card we're going to talk about is going to be Demon's Disciple. And let me just pull it up here on my phone. Okay, Demon's Disciple, yeah. So Demon's Disciple is a 3 mana 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, and it's a cleric. So this is the classic like flashback marauder effect. They've done functional reprints of this kind of card so many times. They even made a strictly better one, more or less, with Plague Herald. It was the Guilds of Ravnica one. I forget the exact name of the card, but basically it was like if your opponent couldn't sack a creature, then they had to discard a card instead, right? And so like this is worse than that in a couple different ways, because it doesn't have that effect, and it also has 1 less toughness. However, it is a cleric, and now basically what you're doing is you're just taking a card that was already fine, right? Which was Flashback Marauder or Merciless Executioner, I think was the other one, and now you're just making it have a relevant creature type. So yes, it's not Plague Bearer. I feel like I'm forgetting the actual name of the Guilds of Ravnica one, but it does have a relevant creature type, and that other card was already it's already seen standard play before. So I think that Demon's Disciple is a sure thing. I feel pretty confident. If you're playing a Cleric's deck, Cleric's decks have a lot of recursion and reasons to want to bring back your own creatures. It's also just a good card for it's like fine for a party deck. Party decks usually want a lot of you want to curve out with your creatures, so this is kind of an awkward 3-drop to play in your curve, but it could happen. I think usually where you'll see this is in either Eldraine based sacrifice decks, like this is great with Cauldron Familiar, for instance, or you could see this in some kind of Cleric's deck, both of which I think are pretty reasonable. Okay, next card we're going to talk about is Leyline Tyrant. So let me pull this up. Leyline Tyrant is a 4 mana 4/4 with flying. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end, and when it dies, you may pay any amount of red, and when you do, it deals that much damage to any target. So there are a couple things to look at here, right? First of all, the body. It's a 4 mana 4/4 with flying. I think that's pretty, that is good. That is a reasonable body to have on a red creature, assuming that it has some other good effects in your standard format, right? But you also need to have the effects for this to be playable. So being able to save mana from turn to turn is definitely pretty interesting, and it's something that red doesn't often get, I would say. So that right there is already pretty interesting, because you're getting this as gravy on top of a good body. When your creature dies, all that mana you've been saving is actually just going to be able to get funneled into it. So you don't even have to spend that mana for it to have a good use. Normally it's if you've got your upwelling effect is okay, so you're saving mana, but for what? Are you going to actually get a big payoff off of this? Are you going to be able to cast some ridiculous spell? Well, here the card kind of fulfills its own prophecy, because you can every single red mana that you don't spend is going to be fueling this card's death trigger. I do think that Leyline Tyrant is not a sure thing, and here's why. I think for this card to be good, you need to be playing pretty close to mono red. I would hesitate to run this in maybe I could see a green red ramp deck running this, but you need to be most of your lands need to produce red mana for me to be super excited about this, and I also feel this card, it's fine at the top of your curve, but it kind of depends on like the removal that's in the format. Because if there's a lot of like exile or bounce, this card could actually be pretty hard to run with. And if you drop it on turn 4 and immediately gets killed, it's like, okay, you got 1-for-1. Like, that's great, you know? So yes, I think that it is powerful, and there are definitely worlds where it could be very good, but I don't see it being a sure thing. You know, I feel like it's more of a long shot. Cool. So we're going to move on to the next card, which is going to be Valakut Exploration. So Valakut Exploration, you get this 3-mana enchantment, right? And every single time you get a land under your control, you get to go ahead and look at the top card of your deck, or you exile it, and then it's like, okay, do I want to play this turn, or do I want to just have it deal 1 damage to my opponent's dome, right? So that's cool. Like, card advantage in red is great. We've gotten a lot of card advantage in red recently. One card that you might want to compare this to is Experimental Frenzy from Guilds of Ravnica. Experimental Frenzy lets you keep casting cards off the top of your deck, but you can't cast any cards from your hand. I think that this card is a lot worse than Experimental Frenzy, because you actually, like, it's tied to your landfall, first of all. So if you don't have lands, this card isn't getting you anything. Secondly, if you play a land and you exile land on the top of your deck, it's like, well, okay, you can't play that card, right? Now, obviously, it can also deal damage to your opponent, which is you know, a big deal, especially if you're playing mono red. Having the ability to kind of like switch over between face damage and more cards, depending on the situation, is useful. So I do like that aspect of the card. My impression on this card is actually to give it a long shot as well. I think that if you're running mono red, I would rather invest in some other form of card advantage that can be a little more reliable, because I feel like if you draw this after you've already played all your lands, you're going to end up with like a pretty awkward top deck. So I don't really believe in this card, but I could see myself being proven wrong. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna move on to Anti-Cognition. So Anti-Cognition is a 2-mana blue instant. You get to counter a creature or planeswalker spell unless its controller pays 2. But if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, instead they don't get to pay 2. It's just countered, and you scry 2. So a couple things. We already have some decent milling support in blue and black, and cards that like are good if your opponent's being milled. And those cards are of course from Thornable Drain. So we're kind of adding to that suite with the rogues from Zendikar Rising, and this is one of the payoffs. So if you look at Anti-Cognition, you already have a fairly solid spell. Now it's worse than Quench at base, which, you know, we've already had Quench for standard, and it just rotated actually. So this is no longer This is not going to be competing with Quench for standard. I do think that your deck needs to be one that can sometimes enable the condition to make this a worthwhile inclusion, because only countering creatures and planeswalkers, like, that's good, but there's a lot of other kind of cards that you might want to counter. So I think that I would really look to play this card in a deck that has some milling tools. It doesn't have to be like a milled deck, but maybe like if you just have like some other cards to like incidentally mill your opponent a bit, like this is probably a solid inclusion. Just like I think it's a little less good than Drown in the Lock, but like kind of a reasonable, like you would probably play it around the same kinds of decks. I do think those decks exist, which is why I'm actually going to give this a sure thing. I think that even if the meta isn't right for it right now, I think that at some point in Standard there will be a deck that makes this card definitely playable. And it's not even that bad in a vacuum, honestly, given that we don't even have Quench anymore. So, yeah, all right. Okay, so next card we're going to talk about is Confounding Conundrum. Oh, here it is. Okay. So Confounding Conundrum. This card is very weird. It does cantrip, which is like the first thing you have to think about. Like, okay, if you have a card that is clearly meant to be a sideboard card, right? you gotta think about like what is the cost of me putting it in my sideboard over other cards? Because at this point in Modern, right, there are a lot of cards that are vying for your sideboard slots, and a lot of them are very, very powerful in certain matchups. So you have to think about like, okay, which of these cards will cover the most amount of matchups in the most efficient way, without costing me too much efficiency on my own strategy. You know, it really depends on what your deck is. But I think the cool thing about Confounding Conundrum is it cantrips already, so you're already getting at least some reasonable utility out of it, even if the hate effect doesn't end up coming into play. But the hate effect is actually not that bad. First of all, it hoses fetch lands, right? Your opponent can't like fetch and then immediately. Your opponent can't play a fetch land and then immediately fetch, or they get one of their lands bounced. They can't. It actually turns off Scape Shift, I believe, because if they Scape Shift for a bunch of lands, the Valka triggers will go on the stack, followed by the Confounding Conundrum triggers. So that means, sure, their Valka triggers go on the stack, but a bunch of their lands get bounced, and they probably don't have 5 or more mountains anymore. I could actually be wrong on this. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure that's how it should work. It also shuts off the Amulet of Vigor decks. I think just like, even if you're running this as a card that's like, okay, I just want to run 2 of this in the main deck, I can play it on turn 2, it'll draw me a card, and then my opponent can't use their fetch lands anymore. Like, that is definitely a reasonable card, especially if you're on the play. So I could see this definitely showing up in some Modern decks. And that is especially true if you're a deck that happens to care about enchantments for some reason. So I feel like this card is actually quite solid for Modern. Cool, so we're going to move on to Null Priest of Oblivion. So Null Priest of Oblivion, it is a 2-mana, 2/1 Menace lifelink, and has a kicker for 4 mana that lets it reanimate a creature. I'm actually a really big fan of this card. I think that this card is definitely a sure thing. And part of my reasoning for this is both of the modes are cards that I would consider like maybe putting in my deck. Obviously, like the 2-mana 2/1 Menace lifelink is not great. It's like, but if you already care about wanting a cleric in your deck, for instance, like that's a card I might consider including. Clerics care about gaining life, but also clerics, well, they like to have creatures in the graveyard, and they like to bring back creatures in the graveyard. So if you've got your Null Priest of Oblivion, this is one way that you could really get a lot of value out of that. And I think that the 6-mana version is like, obviously it's not insane. Like a 6-mana Zombie 5 plus a 2/1 is like, but it is reasonably costed, and the kicker gives you a lot of flexibility. I think that this is fine for aggro and really nice for mid-range. If you're running mid-range, you can play this if you're trying to be the aggressor, or if you want to try to slow down an aggro deck. It does fine at both of those things. And then if you get to 6 mana, you get a very reasonable effect out of your 2-drop. So I'm definitely a fan of this. I think it'll be pretty solid for standard. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is Kargan War Leader. And I believe this is the multicolor one. Yeah, okay, so Kargan War Leader is a 3-mana 3/3 that gives your other warriors +1/+1. So I think a lot of people have been a little disappointed in this card, because I think people were expecting something a little more like equipment focused, given that a lot of the warriors have equipment synergies, and that's fair. I think people are kind of sleeping on it though, because like lords in the past have seen play as just 3-mana 2/2, buff your other guys, and then like a slight additional effect. This is a 3-mana 3/3 that also buffs your other guys, and there are plenty of warriors in red and white that are quite good in standard right now. Stuff like Seasoned Hallowblade, Alpine Houndmaster, even Winota's a warrior. So you could actually slot this into the current Winota shell, and it does buff a decent number of your cards without you even like trying to build a warrior deck, you know. And there are plenty of non-human warriors in this set that would also fit great into that deck. So I'm quite high on this card, actually. I am giving it a sure thing because I think that putting I think that putting a Lord effect on an actually pretty reasonably costed body is something that people are going to underestimate. So yeah, I'm a fan. Okay. So the next card we're going to talk about is Salundi Vision. Okay, so this is exciting because this is our first MDFC card. So Salundi Vision, the front side lets you impulse 6 cards, and you can either get an instant or sorcery. The back side is a tapped land, taps for blue. So to preface this, I think most of the MDFC cards are going to be a lot better than they appear, because having the extra option to play them as a land will give you additional value when you're building your deck, because you can decide to run fewer lands in your deck if you can afford like to play those tapped lands. And then if you treat them as like lands that sometimes have an added kicker of giving you like a slightly overcosted spell, that provides a lot of value because your draws will just generally be more action filled, right? And that, don't we all want that? So I think that I'm prefacing that. However, I think that this card is one of those cards that looks better than it will play. If you are running a deck that is trying to spam out a bunch of spells, this is very slow for that kind of deck. Because, like, if you're playing an Impulse Effect, having an Impulse Effect cost 3 just to cycle is going to be rough. And I think that if, in your games, if you're playing this card, it's usually going to mean that your draw wasn't actually that great because you needed to play this to find something else. Yes, like, and also I think those decks are less in the market for a tapped land because you're really just trying to spam out your spells quickly. I will say that if you're running something like Kaza, that makes this card a lot better because Kaza can just tap to discount this for like 1 or 2 mana, and then this is like fine. In fact, it's very good at 2 mana. Like, it's very, very good. It's pretty much a better impulse. I believe it is actually just a better peer through depths. So I do think that if you are running Kaza, I could see this in a deck. I'm still going to give this a long shot because personally, I'm not a huge fan of the 1-for-1 impulse for only 3 mana. Even though I know it does look like 6 cards, I don't know. I need to see it, but I'm going to give it a long shot. Cool. So the next card we're going to talk about is Vine Gecko. So Vine Gecko is a 2 mana 2/2. I believe that's what it is. Let me double check. Yeah. Okay. So Vine Gecko is 2 mana 2/2. The first kicked spell you cast each turn costs 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a kick spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Vine Gecko. So this is a pretty decent enabler. This is the first card we've seen actually that cares about like casting spells like with kicker and just caring about like having kicked spells in the set. It is not the last. There's a decent number of them, and I think that there are plenty of reasons for why you would want to run this kind of archetype, but this is definitely like one of the stronger reasons. Note that this does not actually reduce the cost of the kicker; it just reduces the cost of the spell. So if you have a spell that maybe costs just 1 mana, this actually won't help you because like 1 mana plus the kicker, but it only reduces the cost of the spell, so it doesn't get reduced by anything. So that is kind of a bummer. But in general, there are there may be like 3 or 4 like pretty cheap kicker spells that maybe cost like 4 mana with the kicker. I think in particular this is great with Into the Royal. Into the Royal would now be a 3 mana spell that bounces something, draws you a card, and puts a counter on the Gecko. I think if you're a deck that already wants to run Into the Royal and some other cards like that, I could definitely see this Gecko being pretty solid. Because like if you get even 1 discount plus counter on this. It's kind of like you played a 1 mana 3/3. Like, not really, but like you spent 2 mana on a 2/2, and then it got buffed to a 3/3, and it gave you mana back. So it's kind of like that. I'm still going to give this a long shot because I think you could build that deck, but I'm not sure if that deck would really function well without the Gecko. So that's why I'm a little nervous about it. But like, this card is pretty solid, and there are draws where you can do some neat things. So maybe I'll give it a maybe. Yeah. All right. So the next card we're going to talk about is Phylath, World Sculptor. So this is basically just like Avenger of Zendikar, but you can play it as your commander. And like, that's not really fair because it actually does do a lot of things better than Avenger of Zendikar. One of which is it costs 1 less, which is a big deal. Like, coming down the difference between 6 and 7 mana is a lot. It's a lot easier to ramp into this. You can ramp into this on potentially turn 3, I believe, in Standard. I might be wrong. Like, potentially, but unlikely. Not only that, but it's better to run this out early with mana dorks, because you don't care as much about going wide. You just need like a couple plants, and then every land that you have, you can buff each one of your plants by a lot. Or you can buff one of your plants by a lot, and then different land, you pick a different plant. That's kind of how it works. But this does mean like it's more okay to chump block with some plants, because you can still just buff a couple. So I think that overall this card is actually probably better than Avenger of Zendikar for Standard. It's probably a lot worse for EDH, because if you're like EDHing and you're doing some like stupid landfall shit, then like obviously you're going to be snowballing a lot harder with all the plants that you made, because you probably made like 30 plants, and then you even each plus 30, and this is not really going to do the same thing. But like, I think that for Standard, this is actually just a better Avenger of Zendikar. So it's cool. I believe, I'm going to give it a sure thing. I think given the current landscape and how green still has a lot of really good ramp cards, I think that ramp will definitely be here to stay as long as Uro's around in Standard, and I think that this card, it's a good reason to run red in your ramp deck, so that's something. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is Mind Carver. So this is a pretty interesting one to me. Mind Carver is a 1 mana equipment. When it enters the battlefield, you get to attach it to one of your creatures, and the equipped creature gets +1/+0 if normally, but if they have 8 or more cards in their graveyard, or if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, the equipped creature gets +2/+1, which is kind of nuts, to be honest. Like, if you have that available, this is pretty close to cranial plating. I mean, like, okay, that's kind of an exaggeration, because cranial plating is absolutely absurd. But like, being able to drop this for +3/+1 for just 1 mana, and then like having it around to be able to drop onto whatever flyer you happen to have flying around is really good. I think that if you're playing a very aggressive style of the milling deck, this is actually worth considering, because it does let you do some pretty cool things. Just being, I mean, it's not really that complicated. It's like, it's very efficient if you got the cool rogue draw, right? I would give this a long shot, because I'm not sure that deck is actually very good. We'll get to that later. But like, this doesn't even necessarily make it into that deck, so it's kind of wonky. I can definitely see it, but not sold. We'll have to see it next. Alright, so the next card is going to be a bit of a doozy. Does quite a few things, and that's going to be Inscription of Ruin. Inscription of Ruin has 3 modes for 3 mana. It can either be a Mind Rot, it can be a weak Unearth, can only return a creature with converting mana cost 2 or less, or it can be like a Smother for 3 mana. So obviously none of these effects are constructed playable. But, of course, when you're evaluating charms, you have to think about how many situations is this covering? And in those situations, is it still a reasonable effect to play? And I think that the answer is yes. I feel like this covers a good amount of stuff. So if your opponent has a creature you can kill, well, it's a bad removal spell, but it's still a removal spell. Not only that, if your opponent doesn't have a creature you can kill, you can just mind rot him. You're playing against control, just mind rot him. Mind rot is, I think, underrated. Obviously, it's not a standard card, but sometimes it gets the job done. Like Lightning was a really, really good card, and a big part of that was the mind rot part. Now, this can also has the the whole kicker thing. I think that's cool. It's cool that your charm can just randomly get you this really big payoff. I think most of the time, by the time you hit 7 mana, the mind rot is probably not going to really hit as hard, and killing something small is not going to be super consequential, and then returning something small is going to be even less consequential. So really, I don't really value the kicker as much, but I still think that the individual pieces here are pretty solid, and I think I'm overall pretty sold on this card. I'm going to give it a sure thing. I feel that Inscription of Ruin should be a reasonable inclusion in some standard decks. I'm not sure what standard decks, and it kind of depends on the meta, but I feel pretty confident that meta will be accommodating enough. Yeah. Alright, so the next card is going to be Ondu Inversion. So Ondu Inversion is an 8 mana Wrath, or rather an 8 mana Planar Cleansing, stapled to an MDFC land. And I'm getting this a sure thing, and the reason why is because I think that there's just so much good ramp tools available in Standard right now that I think we'll see a resurgence in the Bant ramp strategy, given that a lot of cards from the Sultai version are rotating. I think as long as the whole Uro shell is around, I feel like that kind of deck will be very strong. And being able to have a land that can also just once you get to enough mana, be one of your sweepers, very, very versatile. And that deck doesn't really get hit as hard by the whole tab land thing because their first couple turns are usually pretty slow. So I'm pretty high on this. I think if you're playing a straight up control deck too, control decks always want to be hitting land drops every turn. And if in something like blue-white control, this card's very good, I think. Just having access to that effect, even if most of the time you're probably going to play this as a land, I still feel like this is a pretty solid standard card. And the fact that it's a planar cleansing is nice too. You can kill planeswalkers, you can kill annoying enchantments or whatever. I'm a big fan of this, yeah. Okay. Oh boy. Okay, so this next one is probably the most controversial cycle in the set, or set of cards in the set, and that is the Pathways. So the Pathways, I'll put them all up on the screen right there. Just kind of cycle through them a little bit. But the Pathways, basically, they're the set's dual lands, and they're very simple. You can have them interplay as one side tapping for one color and one side tapping for another color. But the kicker is that both sides get to come in untapped. And that's caused a certain amount of discontent among the community, given that they are, in a vacuum, just better than basic lands. This is the first time that a dual land has ever been that, really, since Alpha. And now, I think a big reason for R&D's explanation of this decision is, well, they don't have basic land types. And basic land types are relevant in a fair number of cases, but I guess if you're just looking at it in a vacuum, it's okay, well, really, unless I really care about islands in my deck, this card's just better, and yes, that's true. And they are sort of, it appears like they're sort of, if not outright breaking, they are bending a rule that they've had for pretty much the game's entire existence since Alpha. And that is a little worrying, right? I do want to say, power level wise though, for these cards, they are not that insane. They're good. And I think for standard, they will absolutely see a lot of play throughout pretty much the entirety of the format. I think that costing you 0 life is really nice on the dual land, and like obviously the drawback is you have to lock in which color like when you play it. So this means it's really hard to play these in a deck that wants to do double one color and double the other color. In fact, I think like that sort of thing is almost impossible with these cards, because they just don't enable that. If you're running out your mono red 1-drop, then you're not going to be able to play your double white 2-drop on turn 2, and that is a real cost. It has a deck building cost. These become a lot worse in 3-color decks, so that's another thing to consider. And I think that as far as like power level for the game goes, first of all, these are just like mana fixing lands, so I don't think that, and they don't actually enable like ridiculous 5-color strategies, like the dual lands did back in the olden days, right? So I think that's something that like we should curb our expectations a little bit. These are not going to break the game. I think that honestly in Eternal formats, we already have a point where most dual lands are pretty much just better than these anyway, or better than basics anyway, like in a practical sense. And the only reason they're not is because of stuff like Blood Moon. So I think that it's a bit of an overreaction to say that this kind of design is going to kill the game or anything like that. It is a little scary because whenever rules get broken, they're scary. Those rules are usually rules for a reason. So I am a little trepidatious about it, but at least for these specific cards, I think they'll be fine, and I'm excited to play with them. I always love some really like cheap, flexible lands that don't cost you life. So yeah, that's sweet. And it's more like they're very good for splashing colors, and they're very good for enabling like 2-color decks that have pretty light pip requirements. But yeah, overall I'm a fan, and the artwork is just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I love the artwork on these cards. Okay, we're going to move on. So the next card we're going to talk about is Thundering Rebuke. Thundering Rebuke is a 2-mana instant in red, and what it does is it's kind of like a Lava Coil from Guilds of Ravnica, but it trades away the Exile clause for the ability to hit Planeswalkers. I actually think that overall that's an upgrade. The Exile clause is definitely important, and there are lots of cases where it matters. Like every single year in Modern Magic, there are more and more cards that have graveyard synergies, and you want to be able to get rid of. But there are also more and more Planeswalkers that you really want to be able to kill. So I'm actually quite excited for this card. I think that it was a little sad that Lava Coil ended up kind of getting sidelined a lot in the last year or so, and I hope that this card will be strong because I do really think it's a great removal spell for red. And it's very flexible. I mean, this can kill 4-drops for 2 mana pretty easily. So I do think that this is going to be an important removal spell for red. I'm definitely giving it a sure thing. I don't think this should see play in maybe in Pioneer. I could see it in Pioneer, but probably not in Modern. Modern has Lightning Bolt and other stuff. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next card, which is Cragplate Baloth. Alright, so Cragplate Baloth. I think this card it's a little underwhelming. Both modes are like fine. Coming down as a 6/6 with haste for 7 mana is a little weak, given that you can have cards like Uro, which let you set up essentially a 7 mana 6/6, assuming you built your deck right and you're able to like kind of fill up your graveyard. But also you can do you get like an extra 6 life and it ramps you and all this other stuff. The hexproof is nice, and I think where this card shines is in a meta where there's a lot of like counterspell control decks, obviously, because it doesn't matter that it doesn't have trample, and also the haste is really important, the hexproof is really important. This card feels like something that R&D decided to put in specifically for ramp decks to sideboard against counterspell control decks. because it can feel really bad if you're ramping to some big threat and then it just gets countered and it's like, well, okay, I'll have a bunch of mana, but that's it. And I think that this helps for ramp decks, especially since Hydroid Crisis is leaving. Those decks are going to become a lot more vulnerable to counter spells again. So I think that this card could see play there. Overall, I'm going to give it a long shot though, because I feel like it needs specific meta conditions and needs to be in the right deck to make it work. But if you do drop this for 10 mana and swing into an empty board, that's pretty nuts. Yeah, okay, so we're going to move on to Kazandu Mammoth. So Kazandu Mammoth, this is actually probably my favorite MDFC card in the set, because the card is just pretty good. Like, even if you never use the land portion, it's a 3-mana 3/3 that can attack as a 5/5, possibly even a 7/7 if you're doing land shenanigans, and like it can just be a land too. Like, this card just does it all. I feel like this card is a slam dunk for standard, and I think this is probably just the best MDFC card, if I'm being honest. It's really good. Honestly, I could see this in older format too. I wouldn't go so far as to say Legacy. I feel like Modern is probably pushing it for this too. Modern has fetch lands, so this can consistently attack as a 7/7. So that's something, and it can also be a land. But I feel like Modern decks are usually efficient enough that the land part is not really as beneficial as it is in Standard. So I think now that I'm thinking about it, Modern seems like a bit of a stretch for this card, but I do really like it for Standard. Okay, we're going to move on to Grekmaw, Skyclave Ravager. Okay, let's see here. So Grekmaw is a 3-mana, essentially a 3/3 because it comes in with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever any of your other creatures dies, if it had a counter on it, it gets its own counter. And then when it dies, you get a free XX, where X is the number of counters on it. So, first of all, you don't actually need to be running this in a +1/+1 counter deck for it to be good. It's a 3-mana 3/3 that makes a 3/3 when it dies. So it's already 6/6 stats worth of value. That is good. Like, that is standard playable. You are getting good value out of this, just playing it in your deck. If you're green-black and you like creatures, just run this. And there are a lot of tools for +1/+1 counter decks, not only in this set, but in this overall standard. I mean, maybe some of them are rotating. I'd have to double check, but I feel like there are a couple other cards, like not only in ZNR but in the whole format. They're like, yeah, this card's good with counters too. You can run this in an Abzan shell and run something like Basri's Lieutenant. Like, that is a really big game. And basically any extra synergy you're getting from this with the second ability is just gravy, because it's just a good card. Like, it's just a good card. It's obviously weak to exile removal, which, is important, but overall, I definitely give this a sure thing. I think this card should definitely be pretty strong for standard. Okay. Next card we're going to talk about is Spell Shield. Spell Shield is a 1 blue mana, gives +0/+3, and then you can kick it for 1 extra mana to also give the creature hexproof. I think that this card is a long shot. I think it's a bit of a surprise that the card's on a list to a lot of people, because it seems like a pretty innocuous effect. There are a couple things that I think are important for this. One, many decks that rely on keeping a specific creature alive in a removal-heavy format will look for effects like this that can help protect your creature from burn spells and even give it hexproof with the kicker. The other thing is that we've been talking about these kicker strategies, and a problem with having cards that want you to cast kick spells is the kicker costs in this set are kind of expensive. A lot of them are, and sometimes it's I don't know how many 4 or 5 mana spells you can expect me to cast in a game, realistically. And that's why I think that Spell Shield is actually going to leave a pretty big mark in those strategies, or at least be pretty important, because not only can it protect your Vine Gecko, it can protect your Vine Gecko and grow it. So I think that this is going to be important for that kind of deck. Now, I don't know if that deck's going to exist, but even in some other deck, like say you're playing like blue-red wizards or any kind of like Delver-ish shell for standard, I feel like this card is not that bad. At least it's a sideboard option. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be willing to give it a try. But I still get a bit of a long shot. Okay, so the next card is going to be Roiling Regrowth. We're pretty familiar with this effect already. It's Harrow at uncommon, and it's actually worse Harrow because the lands come into play tapped. I'm okay with this being worse Harrow because this is a format with cards like Uro and Azusa, and Lotus Cobra is getting reprinted, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on with Ramp in this format. I think that given that the format already has Cultivate, you probably don't need this. But it does give you extra like redundancy at that slot, and it also triggers landfall an extra time, and it lets you fill your graveyard for Uro. So maybe this is just better than Cultivate. It's possible. I could see it. It kind of depends on the deck, but getting 2 instant speed landfall triggers is definitely important if you're playing a deck that is like Brushfire Elemental plus a Coom Hellhound, or you're playing like Felidar Retreat or some other just like generally if you're deck's doing landfall stuff, you might want this over Cultivate. And the instant speed is definitely nice for that. But overall, I'm going to give this a long shot. I think that the ramp decks will usually have better options. So the next card I'm going to talk about is Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. So this card is very strange, but in a good way. It's usually going to be at least a 5/5 because assuming you ran this out, you either have 5 lands or you have like a creature that taps for mana, in which case that creature is now a land. So great, Ashaya is going to be a big, a big/big. The problem with this card is that it doesn't have any kind of resistance to removal other than being big. It doesn't trample. It doesn't have haste. It's just a big monster that makes your other creatures tap for mana, which is cool. But the problem is if you're going to spend 5 mana on something like that, you want to be able to have it resist removal in some kind of way, either by generating value or having haste or literally like having hexproof or a battle or like a end of the battlefield ability or dice trigger. Like it doesn't have any of that. So I think that the problem with this, as cool as it is, it's just not. It's not really what you want to be doing for 5 mana in a format like Standard, unfortunately. Because there are plenty of removal spells that will just 1-for-1 this for much less mana, and it's just a real feels bad moment when that happens. So it also doesn't even guarantee you the win. When you do resolve it, it doesn't get removed because like it's just big/big. Like you can just lose to a pile of tokens, and the effect is only really helping you if you have a bunch of creatures already. So I think this is a long shot card, as cool as it is. I don't feel very confident in it, but which is fine, but it is what it is. So next card we're going to talk about is Aura, Skyclave Hierophant. This card is, I think, being slept on. I feel like this card is very, very strong. And it is like the reason to play Clerics. First of all, we talked about the Cleric version of Fleshbag Marauder earlier. That card is insane with Aura. You can drop it on turn 3. Edict your opponent, sacrifice itself to its own ability. Next turn, play Aura. Whenever Aura dies, you can get back the Fleshbag Marauder. I'm forgetting the name of it. It's like Demon's Disciple. There we go. So like that's already a very good 2-card combo. But Aura lets you do a lot more things. Even if you're not playing Clerics, like you don't have to be explicitly playing a Clerics deck to make Aura good, because as long as you're running like some good 3-drop or lower Clerics in your deck, like this card's getting you value when it dies, and that's really useful, I think. Not only that, it has lifelink, so it's a good play against aggro. You're playing like your grindy value deck, but it's also really good against aggro. So really, you only like fade to control with counterspells or exile abilities. I think this card is a sure thing. I feel very strongly that the Clerics deck should actually be pretty solid for Standard, surprisingly enough. But yeah, Okay, we're going to move on to Cleansing Wildfire. So this card is pretty bizarre. It's going to destroy a base. It's going to destroy a land, and then they get to go get another basic land, put it into play tapped, and it cantrips. So like, that's not horrible. You can use it for standard to trigger your own landfall effects, and you can use it in modern to screw over Tron. And the cool part, it's like okay, you can bring in this sideboard card, and then also cantrips, right? The problem is it doesn't really screw over Tron that much because Tron has so many redundant ways of finding their Tron pieces anyway, that destroying one without even really setting them back on mana, and they're probably going to have like a random forest to get right too. It's not really doing what you want. It's 2 mana too, so it's like, would you really rather be spending your turn 2 to do this, or would you rather like be advancing your own game plan, in your modern deck? So I think this card is a bit of a trap. If you want to screw over Tron, just play Blood Moon. Like that's all I gotta say. I don't know. This is too much of a gimmick, but for standard, I mean, maybe if there are annoying lands, I'm sure if Field of the Dead was still playable in standard, people would probably play this. But thank God it's not. So like, but there are probably going to be annoying lands that you might want to kill, and I could see this showing up in standard. I don't really see that right now, so I'm going to give it a long shot. But it is the kind of effect that could show up for sure. Okay, so the next card I'm going to talk about is Inscription of Insight. So Inscription of Insight is another one of these inscription cards, and it's like a charm, but you can also kick it to do all 3, which is awesome. And this card I think is actually very good. It's definitely the best of the 3. All 3 abilities are effects that I could see, or at least the first 2 are abilities that I could see playing this card in your deck just for that ability. Bouncing 2 creatures for 4 mana, not ideal, not horrible for 4 mana though. Scrying 2 and then drawing 2 cards. Hell, Glimmer of Genius was played in many standard decks, like without any energy, any energy synergies or anything. So I think that Inscription of Insight, just for those 2 abilities, is a very good card. You can make an XX, token with an X number of cards in your hand. You're almost never going to do that, I think, unless you need a blocker, or like you're trying to swing for lethal, surprisingly, or whatever, which is cool. You can do that. And the thing is, like, if you're playing this card, you're a control deck, right? That means you're probably going to be able to kick this in, if your deck executed its game plan. And if you do that, you probably just win. I mean, your elemental is going to be 2 bigger. You can even like bounce your own creatures if you want to make the elemental bigger, but I don't think that's really like the play. I do think this card is, or not elemental, illusion, sorry. I do think this card is definitely the best of the inscriptions. I'm going to give it a I'm blanking. I'm going to give it a sure thing. Yeah. Sorry about that. All right. So the next card we're going to talk about is Kargan Intimidator. So this is a pretty interesting card. Obviously, it uses the Cowards Can't Block Warriors line from El Clasico, Boldweir Intimidator. Now you get a 2-mana 3/1, and you get 3 abilities that are all pretty solid, but you can only use them once each turn. You can give Kargan Intimidator +1. You can give a Warrior Trample, and you can make a creature a coward. I think that all 3 of these abilities are fine, and you don't actually need to be a Warrior deck to make this good. You can play this on turn 2. It attacks for 3. If your opponent ever plays a blocker, it's like, okay, I can pay 1. That guy can't block my Kargan Intimidator. Just keep swinging. If your opponent gets a block off, well, you can give it Trample, or you can give +1/+1 to get through some extra damage. I think this card is just a good red deck wins creature. And if you happen to be playing a Warrior deck, then you can just make their creature unable to block at all from your whole team. So I think this card is definitely really, really good. I expect it to show up in standard decks for sure, so I'm going to give it a sure thing. All right, so the next card is another kicker payoff. This time it's a card that also has kicker itself. It's a Roost of Drakes. So this is kind of like a Drakehaven callback, a little bit from Amonkhet. Roost of Drakes is 1 mana, but you can also kick it for 3. And then whenever you cast a kick spell, or you kick it yourself, it makes a Drake. I think this card is like the reason to be doing the kicker deck. Well, there are a couple of reasons. I'm more sold on this than I am on Vine Gecko because this is hard to interact with, and it can also enable itself, so multiple copies will start snowballing, and like you can play the first one on turn 1, and then when you play the second one on turn 4, you get 2 Drakes, so like that snowballs really quickly. I'm definitely a big fan of this card. I think if you are playing the kicker deck in Standard, like this is the reason to do it. I just said that, but like just to reiterate, like this is your payoff. You know, this is the big one. I'm not convinced that the kicker deck is going to be a thing in Standard. I'm not convinced. I'm sorry. At least not like if you're playing a deck that's like this is the kicker deck. You know, because I gave Coralhelm Chronicler a sure thing. Because that card doesn't need to be like you're playing the kicker deck to make that card good, you know? Like you just need a certain amount of kicker cards in your deck. Whereas this card you want to go all in, right? So I think that the deck probably just doesn't have enough support. So I'm actually going to give this a long shot for now. You know, maybe they'll print more kicker cards and then they'll get a little more support for Standard. But right now I'm a little unconvinced. Alright, next up we're going to talk about Tabarex, Hope's Demise. So I know I did just talk about the Clerics deck and how I think that deck's going to be pretty solid. And Tabarex, it does kind of check off a lot of those boxes. It works well with Demonic Disciple. It works well with Aura. Coming down as just a 3-mana 2/2 flyer is definitely good. But to give it lifelink, you need 5 or more counters on it, which is honestly probably not going to happen. I think that this card is definitely like a little bit win more because the base is like a little unless you're building like an aristocrat style deck though, in which case I would feel much better about it. But I think that the clerics deck is a little bit more mid-rangey, at least just from my looking at it, but I could be proven wrong. For this card in particular, I'm going to give it a long shot. It's pretty close though. I'm not really sure. I could definitely see this being like insane card for the clerics deck that I'm just like looking stupid, but my gut is that this isn't great, or it isn't at least what the clerics deck wants to do. Okay, gonna move on. We're going to go on to Tazri, Beacon of Unity. Now, Tazri, Beacon of Unity is, again, it's actually a pretty big payoff for running a party deck. This card comes down for very cheap if you are curving out with a party strategy. So if you go turn 1, party creature, turn 2, another party creature, you can cast this on turn 3. And a 3-mana 4/6 with an ability that also lets you get more creatures, like that is a very big game. I think if you are running party, you probably want to be playing this card, which means you probably want to be white. Now, obviously, there's the whole like black-red thing, but I think if you're playing black-red party, you probably want to just be Mardu, because I feel like this is like the biggest party payoff. It also encourages you to be playing a lot more like multicolor strategies, which can be a little difficult in the current format just because the mana fixing is pretty slow for those kind of decks. You don't have Shocklands anymore, and now you just have the temples and like the pathways, which we discussed earlier are not very good for like 3-color plus decks. So I'm a little sus on this for like if you're trying to like live the dream and go like, you know, the full like 4 or 5 color package. Even 3 colors is going to be dicey, I think. But, you know, I don't necessarily like not like. I think it could be done, but I just think the optimal build is probably like blue-white, maybe green-white, or maybe black-red, or maybe Mardu. But like the point is, I like this card because it gives you a lot of different decks to try out. while also like it gives you some reasonable options and then lets you also try to shoot the moon. But regardless, I do think this is a sure thing. I think it'll show up in some deck. It's just too powerful not to. Yeah. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about the first Planeswalker that we've hit in this set review, and that is going to be Nahiri, Heir of the Ancients. So, Nahiri, her 3 abilities are, first of all, she comes down 4 loyalty for a 4-mana Planeswalker. Pretty good. Her +1 lets her go up to 5, which is like a reasonable amount for a 4-mana Planeswalker. And it also creates a creature, so this card is pretty resilient. Creating tokens on a +1 is really good for a 4-mana Planeswalker. We've seen that from many Planeswalkers in the past. If you're able to create a token on your +1 and your 4 mana, like you're probably like that means you're protecting yourself. It means that you can play it into an empty board, maybe have it survive, and then have it keep generating value for you while you play more stuff. Now Nahiri, she synergizes quite a bit with all the warrior equipment stuff. The fact that red and white usually kind of struggles with finding ways to generate additional card advantage. So the fact that this can also, like, you know, develop your board, it can help you generate tempo by, like, letting you cheat on equip costs. It can find you more cards as long as you're playing, like, a deck with a lot of warriors and or equipment. It can even deal damage, because if you have enough equipment in play, like, this can deal, like, maybe 4 damage, right? So, like, I think this card is so when I first saw this card, I thought it was very weak, but now that I've seen the whole set, I feel like there's a reasonable amount of support for this kind of deck. And I'm willing to give this a sure thing. I think that there will be a shell for this. If not now, then in the future when more warriors and or equipment are released. This is just for standard, of course. I don't think this card is powerful enough in any other format. But in standard, you know, I think it's pretty solid. Cool. So we're going to move on. We're actually going to be on the other Planeswalker in multicolor, which is Nissa of Shadowed Boughs. So this card is very interesting because having a extra loyalty on a landfall is very, very bizarre. It means that if you play your cards right, this card can ultimate the turn you play it, which is pretty huge because that means you get like a flexible removal. You get a flexible like reanimation spell. If you play this on turn 5 and then play a land, you can just go ahead and reanimate something. If you have like some kind of like Fabled Passage already there, you can even like play this, reanimate something, and keep the Planeswalker around. Not only that, she also lets you attack with a 3/3 Menace every turn. That's not as good as creating a 1/1, I believe, because that doesn't actually allow her to protect herself at all, and it means that you have to be ahead on board when you play it. But that also means like the kind of deck that you want to run like reanimation spells is not really the kind of deck that you want to be ahead on board in turn 4 necessarily. So this card feels a little disjointed in what you want to be doing with it. I think if you're playing this card, you actually want to mostly use it for the ultimate, because that is much more powerful than her +1. Which is fine. I think, like, at the end of the day, I'm going to give this card a long shot. I don't think it doesn't feel as, like, easy to take advantage of as, like, many of the Planeswalkers that have been good in Standard recently. And I know we're losing a lot of them with War of the Spark leaving, but I still don't feel like this card matches up to what, like, we currently want a standard playable Planeswalker to feel like. You know, which is fine. I think I'm okay with that. Alright, so we're going to move on to what is actually, I think, is in my top 3 favorite cards in the set. And that is... where is it? Here it is. Okay, so that is Bloodchief's Thirst. Man, I freaking love this card. So, this card is very Fatal Push-esque, right? It's pretty clear. Fatal Push lets you destroy a creature or Planeswalker with, a creature with converted mana cost 2 or less, and then if you got the Revolt off, then it can do 4 or less, right? Bloodchief's Thirst if you're playing it for 1 mana, you're only ever going to kill something converted mana cost 2 or less. Now that's actually quite fine. Fatal Push was a very good card in Standard, and it is a very good card in Pioneer, and those formats don't have fetch lands. And in Modern, a lot of the time, like, really, you don't care about the Revolt that much. But it's nice to have it, I guess. So, when you look at Blood Chasers in Standard, the unkicked version is already very good. And yeah, the Planeswalker converted mana cost 2 or less, that doesn't really matter that much. But when you kick it, being able, like, 4 mana to destroy a creature is, like, fine. It's totally fine. And when you add on to that, like, it can destroy creatures with Planeswalkers for 4 mana, while also being a solid 1 mana removal spell for early drops, I think this card is an absolute Standard All-Star. Not only do I think it's a Standard All-Star, I actually think that in Pioneer it'll completely replace Fatal Push. I think that in Modern and older formats, Fatal Push is probably still better, but the fact that you can kick this to kill Planeswalkers, means that in some metas, maybe you want this over something like, over Fatal Push in a deck like Jund, maybe, because that deck generally has enough mana to throw something like this around. I'm not super convinced. I could definitely see myself being wrong on this. But the fact that this is even comparable to Fatal Push in a format with fetch lands is, like, kind of amazing, you know? I'm a big fan of this card. And I think that most of my Standard decks after the set is released will probably be involving this card, because I think it's just an amazing removal spell. Okay, we're going to move on to Tangled Florahedron. So Tangled Florahedron, one of the simpler MDFCs. You can either play it as land, or you can play it as a land that costs 2 mana, but it doesn't, you know, like, okay, it's either mana, dork, or a land, right? I think this is obviously, like, extremely cute art, very, very cute art. I also just think it's a good card too, because it's going to be producing you mana no matter what, right? And having a land that you can kind of choose to also use as a ramp spell, and it's not like literally a ramp spell, but like it ramps you, I think that is something that's very valuable to have. This card feels like the kind of card that will replace lands in your deck, because already Mana Dorks sort of do that. Like, Mana Dorks already sort of replace lands in your deck, and now the fact that you can also literally just play this as a land makes it kind of a free inclusion in a lot of green decks that don't care about the early turns too much. I am very high on this card. I'm gonna give it a sure thing, for sure, because again, I expect ramp decks to be very good, and I expect this to go in those ramp decks. So yeah. Alright, so the next card is going to be Thwart the Grave. Thwart the Grave, this is kind of a weird party payoff, but it's interesting because it can res 2 creatures for as low as 2 mana. And when you look at that, like, that scenario, it's like, wow, that is really, really powerful, you know? Especially since it's not limited on what it can res, other than that one of them has to be a cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard. But we assume you're already doing that, you know? And I think that if you're playing this in Standard, like, this is fine at 4 mana, you know? As long as, like, what you're returning is, like, both at least CMC2, you know? And I think once you're getting cheaper than that, or returning bigger stuff than that, this can be a very big payoff. So if I was looking to build around this card, I would probably play it in black-white, probably, because black-white, you get to run the you get to run Tazri, which is one big creature that you can res with this. While you can also run black for having, like, some discard outlets, some other stuff like that. Maybe if you run this in black-red, you have access to, like, the sacrifice package, and this can be, like, kind of a variant of the sack deck. Unfortunately, though, it feels like it's not the best option for any of those archetypes, and I'm a little unconvinced as to, like, if you try to cast this in the early turns, how often are you actually going to be able to get those big targets into your graveyard? And it's only really a great reanimation spell when you already have a board presence. So that's the other thing. Like, if you already have a board presence, what do you need your reanimation spell for? You know, you're asking to get Raft. So I know it seems very powerful, but in practice, I'm actually going to give this a long shot. I don't feel super strongly about this card's chances, but it is a powerful effect. So I at least wanted to mention it. Okay. Felidar Retreat is next. Felidar Retreat gives you an option between either advancing your board presence or, you know, making your board presence stronger, like that already exists. I think that getting the vigilance part is really important too, especially if you already have a wide board, because it lets you kind of attack with impunity. Overall, I definitely think that this card is a long shot, because coming down in turn 4, I mean, it's actually going to be pretty hard for you to consistently hit those land drops after that. I think that it's a little too slow. Maybe as a top end in like an aggressive landfall deck, I could see it. That already can, you know, go wide with tokens and stuff like that. And you know, that's not the worst idea. I think that this card is definitely potentially powerful, but I just don't see right now. I don't see a deck where this card like super shines. So that's why I'm going to give it a long shot. Alright, so the next card I want to talk about is Master of Winds. Now this is kind of one of the cards that is in the general theme of like being synergistic with either wizards or with instances or sorceries. Kind of similar to Kaza Royal Chaser. This card is a bit better in like a non-wizards deck, actually, I would say, because it's kind of near the top of your curve, and I think wizards decks probably want to be running a pretty low curve and probably top out at 3 drops. I do feel like this card is definitely pretty strong in a vacuum, though, if you ignore like the wizard part in the bottom line of text still, because the ETB is actually quite strong. Drawing 2 cards and then discarding 2 is playable as like a 2-mana effect, or discarding 1, sorry, is playable as like a 2-mana effect. See like Chart a Course being like honestly a solid card even in decks that didn't really attack that much. So when you attach it to a 1/4 flying body, that's already fine. You can also kind of, you know, use this to attack for 4 if you combo it with the spell, and it also doesn't have the inherent weakness of switching power and toughness, because you can like specifically have it be 4/1 or 1/4. So like, for example, Wandering Fumarole would often get like hosed by instant speed burn spells because they could just target it in response to swapping its power and toughness, and then it would die no matter what, essentially. So this card doesn't have that weakness. I'm going to give Master of Winds a sure thing, because I think that it's a very flexible card, either in wizard decks, non-wizard decks. You can run it in party decks. It has graveyard synergies. It has spellslinger synergies. Just really flexible card. It's not going to be the best card in your deck ever, really, but I feel like it's a great glue piece. Yeah. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is Concerted Defense. Oh, okay, yeah. So Concerted Defense, it's going to be a 1 mana, pretty similar to Spell Pierce. Now, Spell Pierce will always counter it unless they pay 2. With even 1 party member, Concerted Defense is going to be the same as the Spell Pierce already. But the fact that it can scale higher also means that like it's just going to be a better Spell Pierce in party decks too. So I think this card is very promising. I'm unconvinced that this will be like a consistent inclusion in standard party decks, because usually you need to have like a certain threshold of actual party creatures in your deck, and this card doesn't actually help you achieve that. I think it's a fine sideboard card depending on the meta, and if your deck like happens to already fulfill the clause, but I don't think this goes into like party decks per se. Like it kind of goes into decks that can enable it a little bit, but not like it I don't know. Yeah. I think that in decks like Delver in older formats, this is pretty much an upgrade over Spell Pierce. I'm going to give this a long shot just because I think that there are plenty of situations where you don't really want this, and it's like you could easily see a meta where like this isn't really played, given that Delver decks have been kind of struggling in Legacy, I believe, since the banning of Red and 6. So we'll see, but yeah, I'm going to give it a long shot. The next card we're going to talk about is Archpriest of Iona. So speaking of party decks, I actually think this is the best party creature in the set, and there are a couple of reasons why. First of all, the card on its own, being a 1-mana 1/2, obviously like that's not ideal, but it's not dead. If you're running it this out in an aggro deck, if you have to attack for 1 a couple times, that's not the end of the world. It scales super quickly though. Even just one other party member makes this a 1-mana 2/2, which is like. I mean, we had Isamu, that card was great. There have been plenty of like 1-mana 2/2s that have all seen constructed play for the most part. I think that the fact that this can also scale up to a 4/2 for 1 mana and potentially add an additional +1/+1 and flying to any one of your creatures every turn, that is insane upside for a 1-drop. So I think that if there's a party deck, this card is absolutely going to be a 4-up in it. I'm giving this a sure thing because I do think that there's enough support for party for standard. I actually think if you're gonna be trying to make some party stuff work in like modern, this is the card to do it with. And maybe this even makes it into modern humans. Like I would not be too shocked. Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna give it a sure thing. Okay, next card is going to be Omnath, Locus of Creation. So I think this is kind of hilarious. Omnath basically adds an extra color every single time he comes back, which is a cool gimmick. And this Omnath certainly does pack a punch that you would expect a 4-color card to have. And here's a couple things. Omnath, it cantrips, and it gives you consistent value in terms of just like gaining life, and if you have any sort of ability, I mean, I'm assuming if you're running this card, you have some sort of ability to trigger the landfall many times in a turn. It's actually kind of crazy because you gain 4 life on every single trigger, meaning that like the first land is going to give you 4 life, right? The second land is going to give you 4 life and 4 mana, and the third land is going to give you 4 life, if I'm reading this correctly. Okay, actually, I am reading it wrong. It'll only do one of those things each time. So I am reading this incorrectly. So it'll give you 4 life, and then 4 mana, and then 4 damage. So that's cool. It's also solid body and draws you cards. So like in the deck that you build to play this card, it is immensely powerful. If you are running this with something like Roiling Regrowth to potentially trigger your landfall triggers 3 times in a turn, this is an immensely powerful card. My issue with this card, and why I don't think it'll be... I'm giving it a long shot for standard, is because it's... The mana issue is a real thing. We are losing shock lands, and we are getting the pathways, which are great for 2-color strategies, but as I talked about before, they're very weak for multicolor strategies. And I am really unconvinced that in standard you can build a successful like 4 or 5 color mana base to run something like Omnath when really I just don't see the mana base support for it. So I'm going to give this a long shot for standard for sure. I think maybe it shows up in some modern deck. Honestly, I would not be surprised by that. You can definitely do some pretty stupid things with the card in modern. And it's a 4-mana 4/4 that cantrips on base. Like that's not the worst thing ever. There's already an Elementals deck in Modern that runs all 5 colors, so maybe you run this as the top end. I don't know. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Alright, so we're going to go with Maul of the Skyclaves next. Maul of the Skyclaves, it's a 3-mana equipment that comes down, gives a creature +2/+2 and flying in first strike, and it'll also attach to your creature automatically, so this is kind of the new tech that a lot of the equipment from this set is doing. I think Maul of the Skyclaves is definitely very strong. I think that if you are trying to build an Equipment Matters deck in Standard, this is definitely going to be in that deck. I find it hard to believe that like there will be a specific like Equipment Matters strategy, just because there isn't a huge density of payoffs, and I think that if you are running like maybe this is like a 2 of that goes along with your Embercleave, because I think Embercleave is the obvious slam dunk for that, but I think that Maul is certainly quite good. I would be willing to give it a sure thing, just because like even if you're not playing the equipment deck, it still does, kind of it can be useful as like a 2 of in any creature deck. If your opponent has a lot of ground blockers, you can bring this out of the sideboard in your white weenie strategy. I'm fairly convinced of this card. I think it'll be like a solid role player, but not like an all-star card. Okay, let's see. Next card is going to be Wayward Guide Beast. So this is kind of like the Goblin Guide esque card, and obviously, so Goblin Guide is an immensely powerful card, and you take a 1-mana 2/2, give it haste. That is going to be a very efficient threat for a mono red deck, right? The problem is that the additional drawback of having to return a land every single time you hit someone with it is pretty severe, and I actually think that the trample is kind of a downside. If your opponent really wants to mitigate the damage, and they block with whatever jump blocker they have, they can even just take 1 damage, and then you'll still have to return the land. I think that really the only reason you would want to play this card is if you are running some kind of landfall strategy, and maybe you can make that work with cards like Valakut Exploration or Felidar Retreat or Brushfire Elemental maybe. But the problem is that I think this card doesn't really play out as a 1-mana 2/2 with haste, because if you are running this out on 1 and hitting them immediately, that is a very bad play. This is actually very bad, unless your deck is mono 1-drops, and even then it's not great. So I am not confident in this card for Standard. I'm giving it a long shot. I think that it has a chance in Modern, because Modern you have access to more landfall stuff, you have Step Links, Plated Geopede, you have all sorts of ETB lands and stuff like that. You also just have a more efficient burn deck, so you can just run straight up Lava Spike deck and put this in as 4 extra Goblin Guides. And I think that's probably fine. So maybe this is played Modern. I'm not an expert on burn or anything, but I think I don't know. I feel like this card is generally going to be pretty weak. We'll have to see. Okay. So the next card we're going to talk about is Umara Mystic. So Umara Mystic is a 3-mana. It's kind of like a We Dragonauts-esque card. I believe it actually is We Dragonauts. But just also it buffs on casting wizards. We Dragonauts, it was fine if a little weak in its current when it was originally printed. It was weak to not played at all when it was reprinted. So now we have Umara Mystic. I'm giving this a long shot, but if you're running your wizard aggro deck, also being able to trigger off of wizards is kind of a big deal. There are plenty of cheap wizards that were just added to the format, and if you're running your wizard aggro deck, I feel like this card actually is a really solid payoff. I would not count this out. I think it has potential. Okay, so next card is going to be Cinderclasm. I am definitely a fan of this card. I believe I was actually a bigger fan of it early on when I was originally spoiled, but I think that if you take it into the context of the kind of decks that want to play it in current Standard, which is generally kind of tempo-y counterburn decks with cards like Brazen Borrower, the problem when you compare this to a card like Flame Sweep is that Flame Sweep didn't kill those flyers, whereas Cinderclasm does. I do think that the 2-mana mode actually does add a lot of value, and being able to just cast it for 2 mana when it would be a better play is something that you really need to consider. It's still instant speed, which is great. I think that generally, um, any sort of like uh, non-aggro red deck should probably look to have this in their sideboard. I'm still giving this a sure thing. I think this card will definitely be showing up in standard, in sideboards, as long as like there's any kind of creature decks running around, and I think it is quite efficient. So don't underestimate the power of just adding like another decent kicker mode, you know. So I'm definitely a fan of this. Okay, so the next card is going to be Coveted Prize. So this card is very interesting. It is potentially an extremely powerful card, but really it's only worth playing if you're playing it for 2 or 1 mana. If you're playing it for 1 mana, it is not only a demonic tutor, but it also lets you cast something. It's also a dark ritual essentially, because it adds an extra 3 mana. Actually, it's like 2 dark rituals, right? That is absurd. I mean, you need to have 4 creatures in play, and they need to be all these different types. So it's definitely going to be really hard to get it for 1 mana. I think this card is something that I would look to run in like the Mardu party deck. I think it is definitely a decent payoff. Running this, even if you're paying it for like 3 mana, that's not the worst thing ever. I still am a little concerned because I think there may be better payoffs in even in Mardu, and I think that given that your deck is going to be looking to run Winota most of the time, if you're red and white, then you probably need like more ways to like you probably need a higher density of creatures is what I'm trying to say. I still think that like this is really good in that it can actually search up and cast Winota if your deck is like built around Winota. So this is definitely something that I would look to consider. It's not like a slam dunk for me, so I'm gonna give it a long shot. Okay, let's move on to Throne of Makindi. Okay, so Throne of Makindi, I'm going to give this card a long shot, and that's just because I think that given the current state of the format's mana, running colorless lands is a bigger drawback than it was pre-rotation. We know that pathways are good, right? But they lend themselves to being more like splashy. They don't really lend themselves to being like, okay, I run this, you know, I just run 4 of each dual land that it's available, and then I can run double white and double red in my deck with impunity. You know, like that's not what pathways help with. So I do think that if you are looking to use Throne of Makindi, your deck needs to be relatively light on mana costs, or colored mana costs at least, and you also need to, you know, have like a decent number of picker spells. But I still think that, you know, this is a pretty reasonable inclusion if you are looking to do some big kicker stuff, because, you know, storage lands have been good in the past, and this is essentially just a storage land that also helps you fix your mana. So I'm definitely not. I think this is like maybe a solid 1 or 2 of if you do build that kicker deck. Okay, speaking of kicker, we now have one of my favorite kicker cards in the set, Seagate Stormcaller. So there are a couple things to note when you're looking at Seagate Stormcaller. The first of which is, this is not Snapcaster Mage, right? It is similar, and it is in some cases actually better, but it is not Snapcaster Mage. Snapcaster Mage is one of the best creatures ever made. It is incredibly versatile. This card is worse than Snapcaster Mage in most decks, but where it is better is A, standard, because Snapcaster Mage isn't legal in standard. B, if your deck is looking to run pretty much only spells that you want to cast on your own turn, like say you're a Dread Horde Arcanist deck, right? I think that this card actually goes better in the Dread Horde Arcanist deck than Snapcaster Mage does, because your opponent actually, like, it's harder for your opponent to interact with this, because if you do cast this, it's like your opponent actually, if they do counter it, it's like you don't even actually have to commit the spell you were going to cast. You know, maybe you don't even have a spell you wanted to cast. So that makes it kind of hard for your opponent to be like, okay, I need to counter this now, you know? Um, Not only that, but like once you do resolve it, and you cast your spell on the stack, it's like, well, now you have 2 copies. So even if your opponent wanted to stop the spell that you were going to cast, it now has 2 copies, right? So there's definitely a lot of play here. I think that this card goes really well in decks that are looking to cast Lightning Bolt, in decks that are looking to cast Thoughtseize, cards like that. So I would be looking for this in like blue-black, maybe blue-red Grixis Delver decks. As for this card in Standard, I think Standard is where you might see the kicker on this come into play. Obviously, the kicker is really expensive, but that's only because the card is already really good by itself. You know, like if you kick this, you know, maybe 1 in every 10 games, that's still a really solid upside to a card that you would probably play even if it didn't have the kicker. You know, and since this has a kicker, even if you don't ever actually use the kicker, you can find it with cards like Coralhelm Chronicler. You can, well, I guess that's the main one, but like you can still find it with cards like Coralhelm Chronicler. And you can also discount it with cards like Vine Gecko. I just think that this card is very powerful. There are also other kicker spells that are cheap, but like you can still copy them even if you cast them kicked. For example, Bloodchief's Thirst. Copying Bloodchief's Thirst with this is absolutely great. It's like you can, for 6 mana, you can go this kicked Bloodchief's Thirst, destroy 2 creatures. Like that is a very reasonable line that you can make with 2 solid cards. So I just think that this card is being a bit underrated. I feel like it'll actually be really, really solid, so I'm giving it a sure thing. Cool. All right. So we're gonna follow this up with Seagate Restoration. So Seagate Restoration. This is, I believe, the first Bolt land MDFC that I'm going to talk about. And normally I'm very, very high on the Bolt lands because the main drawback of a lot of MDFC lands is that they come into play tapped, right? But as we all know, shock lands are very good, and having the option to pay life when it doesn't matter as much, or you just need the land untapped is very, very valuable. So yes, 3 life is different than 2 life, but I still think that honestly, as long as the front side is something you reasonably might want to cast in a game, the cost of running a couple of these in your deck is very, very low. The problem with Seagate Restoration is that a lot of the time it's like I don't really see a time where I'd want to cast this in a game that I'm not already going to win. Because if I'm playing Control, it's like 7 mana to draw maybe 3 cards at sorcery speed is kind of a big deal. I think that it is unlikely that since you want to play this in a Control deck, paying 3 life there is a bigger deal, right? So I wouldn't replace lands for this in my Control deck, which makes the prospect of playing this a little worse, because usually the strength of the Bolt lands is you want to replace lands in your deck with the Bolt lands. For that reason, I'm giving this a long shot. I'm not super excited about this in Standard. I am excited for it in EDH, but I think overall, the card is just a little too expensive. If it were 6 mana, we could talk. I think this card is the worst of the Bolt lands for sure. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about Inscription of Abundance. So, I've talked about both the inscriptions already, I believe. I think this is the worst one. I'm giving this a long shot. I don't think it's a bad card. 2 mana for 2+1/+1 counters is fine at instant speed for Standard. 2 mana fight is pretty weak, and I think that the life gain one is almost just so bad. So really, this is a combat trick, or it's like a flash aura that has a kicker to also do all these insane things. So at 5 mana, yes, this card is very good. But the problem is that it requires you to already have a creature in play. It can be countered by a removal spell. All sorts of things that I think is just this card is too gimmicky and too situational for me to really see it as a solid inclusion in my main deck, just because the reason the other 2 were good is because they already are good as charms. But this card is just not very good as a charm. It's only good if you kick it. So that's why I think I'm giving it a long shot. I don't think it's very strong. Okay, so the next card is going to be Merfolk Windrobber. So let me just pull this up real quick. Okay, Merfolk Windrobber. You've got a 1-mana 1/1 flyer. When it hits them, they mill a card. Okay. Now, the last ability, you can sack it to draw a card. But you can only do it if they have 8 or more cards in their graveyard. I'm going to give Merfolk Windrobber a long shot. That's not because I don't think the card is good. The problem is that this is the card that you're running in your like rogues deck in standard, right? And I think the problem with rogues right now is just, given that I expect Uro to be the best card in standard post rotation, Uro is so good at beating rogues, because not only are you fueling their Uro when you're milling them, they actually can shut off your deck by exiling like 6 cards from their graveyard. You know, like this is just not. It's not a strategy that is well positioned in what I expect the meta to be. So that is the problem with this card. I think it's fairly likely that Uro will be banned at some point, at which point this strategy becomes a lot more interesting / viable. This card I think will probably go in that deck because it's an efficient flyer. You know, it can mill them by itself. It also plays in with your other rogues. It's good with Soaring Thought Thief. And, you know, it does like... Being able to cantrip off of it when you want another card is also very useful. It doesn't cost you any mana to do that, so like you can chump and sack it, you can sack in response to a removal spell, whatever. You know, like I think that in a vacuum this card is quite fine, but I just think that the strategy it goes into is pretty weak. So that's why I'm giving it a long shot. Okay, next up we're gonna talk about Kitesail Cleric. Right off the bat, I think this card is a long shot. I think people might be surprised that I'm including it here. I do think that there's a lot of flying support in standard right now, and given how like I'm forgetting the name. I want to say Pride of the Clouds, but Pride of the Clouds is like a really old card. The 2-mana flying lord from Ikoria. There's also a lot of like decent flying support in M21. I think we may even get more in like Strixhaven. Hard to say, but like. I feel like this card is also just like a very solid inclusion in a flying deck because you oftentimes just want 1-mana 1/1 flyers anyway, and then the kicker is actually fairly solid. Like dropping this for 4 mana at the top of your curve and tapping down 2 blockers is quite decent, especially since most of your team has flying anyway. So I think overall I'm actually pretty sold on this card in that deck. I'm still giving it a long shot because I'm not sure if that deck will exist, but overall I think it's fairly good. Yeah. It's also a cleric, which is like something we should note. I don't really know if you include this as your cleric in party decks since Archpriest of Iona already exists, but you know it's worth mentioning, I guess. Our next card is going to be Zareth San, the Trickster. So Zareth San, this card, I did not think of this card much. I did not think very much of this card at first. However, if you look at the card Inkai's Servant of Oni, this card is essentially Inkai's for 1 less mana. Yes, it doesn't regenerate, and yes, you have to return a rogue, but you're probably going to be wanting to run this in a deck that has rogues anyway. Your rogue deck will probably be milling them. I think this makes a very solid top end for the rogue strategy. And even if you're not running like a rogue deck, you can just run a deck that has rogues. And there are plenty of good rogues in standard. There's like Acquisitions Expert. There's okay, I'm sure there are more examples, but like I just feel like rogue is a fairly it's a fairly common creature type, and I'm sure that there will be a blue black strategy that doesn't have to be like, okay, I'm the rogue deck, you know. And even if you're not expressly milling them, still there's probably going to be some decent permanence to steal with this. Dropping this as a 4-drop, even like bouncing your Acquisitions Expert is insane because then you can make them discard another card. So I just think there's a lot of play to this. You can also just drop it as a flash 4/4 on 5 mana, and that's not embarrassing. So it's not even like you have to be running rogues to make this good. I think that I'm giving this a long shot still because I think that it is a little situational. And again, as you mentioned with the Uro thing, Uro does like make this kind of strategy cry a lot. But yeah. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to Skyclave Cleric. So this is actually one of my favorite cards in the whole set. I think I'm much higher on this card than a lot of people. What I love about Skyclave Cleric is people might not remember, but like a Ration Cleric, it was the same card, just not with the MDFC part, right? And that card was actually like a very solid sideboard card for pretty much like most of its time in Standard. It's simple, but getting a blocker and getting some life is exactly what you need against some decks like Mono Red and whatever. So, not only that, but like you can even main deck this in your control deck. I think running this as like extra lands to go from 24 to 27 lands, that makes this very attractive because control decks really love to hit their land drops every turn. And if you already are doing that, and you're against aggro, why not just drop a 1/3 blocker? I'm very, very high on this. I think that also in the Clerics deck, this is slam dunk. If you are basically any sort of deck that cares about the body, cares about the blocker, cares about not dying to aggro, cares about lands, I think that this card is very, very good sideboard card and possibly even main deckable. So I'm giving this a sure thing. I think that this card will definitely make an impact on Standard, even if it's just in sideboards, but I could see it being in main decks too. Okay, next up we're going to talk about Swarm Shambler. So Swarm Shambler comes down as a 1/1, has a counter. I think that it's got two abilities, right? It's got the when it's targeted ability, and it's got the second ability. Let's talk about the second ability first. If you're familiar with Hangerback Walker, one of the things that made Hangerback Walker good is you could just drop it on turn 2 and then just keep buffing it. And that actually wasn't a bad card, even though yes, the death rattle, like the death trigger was important. But like honestly, just playing it on turn 2 as a 1/1 and then buffing it for 1 mana a turn was actually like a very solid strategy. So Swarm Shambler comes down on 1 and can do the same thing. So you trade the death trigger for like 1 less mana. I think that's already a very solid trade, especially if you're playing like a +1/+1 counters deck, and the first ability can come into play, right? If you're playing a +1/+1 counters deck, it can make it very hard for your opponent to interact with you, because first they have to kill the Swarm Shambler, or else anything else they kill is like they're just going to give you more 1/1s. You're probably attacking them this whole time, so I think that this card is for sure a sure thing. I think it's good enough to see play in decks that don't even run +1/+1 counter synergies, and I think it's very, very good in the decks that do. So I'm definitely very high on this. Okay, next up we're going to talk about Drana, the Last Blood Chief. So Drana is, a 4-mana flyer. A 4/4 flyer for 5, which is alright stats. It's not great. Whenever she attacks, she's going to get back any non-legendary creature in your graveyard that your opponent chooses. So it's going to be the worst creature in your graveyard, which is kind of a weird dynamic. You can manipulate what you get back with stuff like Escape, but I don't think that's really going to come up very much. I think where you do run this card is probably in the Cleric's shell, because it is a Cleric, and like Clerics, we've already discussed, Clerics are going to be kind of about sacking and reanimating and kind of grinding people out that way. I could see this in some kind of mid-range deck that doesn't run very many creatures, and the ones it does run are pretty high impact. Returning with a counter on it is nice too. I just think that in today's current Standard landscape, you need to be having your threats do something when they get immediately 1/1. So that's why I'm not super high on this card. I'm giving it a long shot. I think there's a world in which it could be good. I mean, getting a creature back every single turn when you attack is really strong. Although the fact that your opponent gets to choose is not great. So yeah, I'm giving it a long shot, just because of how like standards these days tend to work. But I could definitely see this being a strong card. So next up, we're going to talk about Sejiri Shelter. So this is one of those cards that I think you almost never would see this run if it was just this effect. Even if it was this effect for 1 mana, this card would probably not be seeing play. But the fact that it has the MDFC changes a lot, because there are plenty of decks where it's like, okay, having access to this effect sometimes in decks that might want to protect a key threat is definitely pretty valuable. And this does a lot of things. It lets you win combats, it lets you attack for the last few points of damage, it lets you counter removal spells. I think this is a very flexible effect to have in your deck, assuming that your deck can afford to play a couple tap lands. Now the problem is that usually you want to have creatures like in your deck to protect, right? So like that means if you're curving out, tap land is not as valuable. So I would say this is maybe like a good like one or two of in your deck, but definitely not like not an all-star by any means. So I'm gonna give this a long shot because there are some requirements that your deck would have to meet before this is a good inclusion. But I do feel like, you know, those could definitely the stars could align in that way. Okay, so next up we're going to talk about Shatterskull Charger. Shatterskull Charger, you're getting a 4/3 for 3 mana with Trample and Haste, so it's obviously very, very good so far. However, if you can kick it as well to make it a 5/4 for 5 mana, so that's also really good. But the problem is that it'll go back to your hand if you don't kick it at the end of your turn. So I think what I really like about this card is if you're playing a mono red deck, you can drop it on turn 3 if you don't have anything else to play. And then if you do end up getting to 5 mana, eventually you can just kick it and have it stick around, right? You can also do some shenanigans by just like putting a counter on it at some point, and then like even if you didn't have to kick it, then it'll just stick around. So I think overall this card is very, very good. I really don't see a downside with this, as long as you are being an aggressive deck. That even if you never kick it, this card is fine if it's at the top of your curve. So I think your deck either needs to be able to ramp out pretty quickly, or somehow be aggressive. So maybe like a landfall aggro deck, or your deck needs to be like a super low curve red deck that can afford to just play this for 3 mana every turn, and then maybe like if you do happen to get 5 mana, okay, great, you know. So that's why I'll still give this a sure thing. I think that both of those decks are totally reasonable to run standard, and I think that this will definitely find a home for sure. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about one of my favorite cards, and I'm so glad this is in the set. It's Into the Royal. So this is a card that was in OG Zendikar, and then they functionally reprinted it when Kicker came back in Dominaria in the form of Blink of an Eye. Into the Royal is a card that's, I think, we should all be pretty familiar with. It's always been a very solid role player. 2 mana for a Disperse is fine. It's not, if a bit unexciting, but being able to just tack on a cantrip for 2 mana makes this a very versatile inclusion. If you're running this in aggro, like sure, you're usually not going to kick it, but it's nice that you can. And then control, honestly, you do kick this a fair bit in control. So I think this is definitely a sure thing. We all know this card. It's great. Look forward to playing with it. Alright, so the next card is going to be Relic Robber. So I love the art on this, first of all. I think the art is amazing. Very flavorful as well. It's like you're stealing some cursed relics and then you gotta hand them off like hot potatoes. I am giving this a long shot for now, because I think where it does work is in sideboards, but the problem is if you're running this against a deck like Red-Black Sacrifice, this card is actually so bad. Giving your opponent just more sack fodder is really not what you want, especially since this card is an undercosted body. It is good if you are running this into any kind of control deck that doesn't have ground blockers, because being able to just like keep giving them damage emblems every turn essentially is really, really big. And you could maybe even force them to Wrath when you don't have a lot of threats out. So like, I think that this card is a potential sideboard inclusion for your mono red deck or whatever like red aggro deck, but it's definitely not the kind of card that will be in every single standard deck. Yeah, so I'm giving this a long shot, but I do think it is good, and I do think it'll see play. Okay. Next up is going to be Magmatic Channeler. I'm a big fan of this card. So this is one of the big wizard payoffs. I think if you're running wizards, this card is definitely going to be in it. I actually think that Magmatic Channeler has the potential to show up in, in Modern. I think that it's really not that hard to hit 4 spells in your graveyard in Modern, especially with like stuff like Thought Scour and what have you. Not only that, so like if you just look at that ability, like it's a 2-mana 4/4 in a lot of decks, which is something that I think could make this a very good Delver inclusion. It's also got a second ability that lets you essentially get some kind of rummaging effect, but it's a little worse than rummaging because you do have to like play that card this turn. It's a very, very good way to enable Madness. So if you are running something like Fiery Temper, this is very good with Fiery Temper, obviously. In Standard, I think the way this will play is you'll play this on turn 2 and maybe use it a couple times to actually discard some spells into the graveyard, which I think is like, it's fine. It's not going to be like a 2-mana 4/4 in Standard, but it'll be a 4/4 by maybe like turn 5, maybe turn 4 if your deck is curving out well. And if you're playing wizards, I mean, this is like one of the best wizards now, so I do think this card is definitely going to be a sure thing. Next up is going to be Shadow's Verdict, which is here. So Shadow's Verdict, it's definitely a very solid sweeper. I think that the big elephant in the room is obviously Uro. This thing exiles Uro, and while also like exiling everything in the graveyard that's annoying, it's gonna deal with like we haven't talked about it yet, but like there's plenty of other recursive stuff that could be showing up, maybe even in this set. So I think that this card is overall just going to be a better Ritual of Soot. Yes, the 5-mana versus 4-mana is important, but I think in the control decks that want this, they already have enough good, efficient removal to get them to this point. They just need like an efficient board wipe that can also help them deal with some of these recursive stuff like Uro. And the fact that it hits Planeswalkers, I'm not sure if there really are any 3-mana Planeswalkers that are annoying with this right now, given that Oko is banned, but maybe there will be in the future. And if so, great. Then this is even better. I'm giving this a sure thing. I think this should be a very solid standard inclusion. Any kind of black control decks, like if you're Esper, blue-black, or whatever. I'm a fan of this for sure. Okay. Next up is going to be Crawling Barrens. So this was actually the first card revealed from the set, I believe, or it was leaked. It was leaked a while back. I think that Crawling Barrens is definitely this is a solid control win condition. It doesn't cost you very much. If you're running like a 2-color control deck, I think this is a very solid manline to include. It's nice that you don't actually have to animate it until it's big/big, because that way you can avoid exposing it to instant speed removal. If you just want to buff it at the end of your opponent's turn, if you got 4 mana, you can tap itself to fuel itself. So like, you only need to have like 4 mana to buff it, as opposed to like 5 mana if it had to tap as part of the cost as well. I think overall this is a solid inclusion for Standard. I don't think it'll see play anywhere else, but I'm still giving this a sure thing. I think that this card will definitely be showing up in Standard control decks. Okay, alright, so the next card is Pelaka Predation. Okay, so this is a card that I think is actually a bit overrated. I'm giving Pelaka Predation a long shot. I think that it is. So the main problem with this card is you have to think about when you want to play the MDFCs, and you have to think about, are the MDFCs good if you already have enough lands? So because if you're just playing this as a discard spell, I think 3 mana is too expensive for a discard spell. So you'd rather have some kind of better hand attack option, right? So now if you're running this like as a land with upside, the problem is the upside is actually not much of an upside, because if you're playing this on like turn 5, oftentimes your opponent's hand is going to be mostly empty, and you'll miss plenty of times with this. It helps that this does hit stuff with converting mana cost 3 or greater, so that's kind of nice. But I just think that overall, like, it's actually a bit of a misleading card in terms of like what you want it to do. So I'm giving this, I am giving this a long shot. Next up, we're going to be on Scourge of the Skyclaves. Alright, so everyone talked about Death Shadow, Death Shadow, Death Shadow, right? Yes, this is a take on Death Shadow. I do not think it is good. I think it is a long shot for this card to see play. The reason Death Shadow is good is because it's very easy to chunk out your own life with stuff like fetches and shocks, while also playing a game of Magic, right? But the problem is that if you are running a card that needs both you and your opponent to be low enough to make this good, I think that it is just going to be hard to make this worth it. Yes, you don't actually need both players to lose that much life for this to be fine. So like, if both players are at 15, or if the highest life total is 15, like, this is a 5/5, right? And that is very good. I guess the problem that I have with it is how often can you rely on that? Because if you are running this in burn, I think that there are better options, and I would rather just have more burn. You know, because like, this is not a good top deck if you need a couple more. Like, if you're just playing the Lava Spike deck, it's like, this is not that great of a top deck. So in Modern, really I could see this in Modern Burn that also just indexes into fetch land super hard, or indexes into shock land super hard, and maybe you run it as like an extra, like maybe you run in some kind of modified Death Shadow deck. I'm not super convinced, because there's plenty of times where you can actually play this on turn 2 because it'll just instantly die. Now, we haven't talked about the kicker. Yes, you can kick it for 7 mana. So in Standard, maybe you run this, and if you do kick it, like, it'll almost guaranteed be insanely big, which is cool. I mean, like, I guess when I look at this card, it feels a little too unreliable. And in the decks that you can build to make it reliable, I feel like those are not good decks. I could be wrong. Maybe honestly you just run this in straight up burn in Modern, and you fetch Shock Thoughtseize them turn 1, and then turn 2, assuming that they fetched at all, you can play this. But like, I just feel like it's a bit dicey. I don't know, a bit too dicey for me. Okay, let's see. Let's move on to Cleric of Life's Bond. So I actually was pretty skeptical of this card when it was first released, or when it was first revealed. I still am a little skeptical. I have been pretty high on the Cleric package after seeing Demonic Disciple in particular revealed, because I feel like that ties together a lot of the weaknesses of the Cleric package. I think that the Cleric's deck is probably going to be the best tribal deck in Standard, if any of them take off, and I think this is like the 2-drop you want to run. Making sure that you getting a Soul Warden effect is nice, as well as, this can potentially grow really big, even if you get like one counter on it. It's an Ajani's Pridemate, more or less, and Ajani's Pridemate has already been shown to be Standard playable, so I'm giving this a sure thing. I think that there's plenty of tools to take advantage of it right now, especially with cards like Heliod adding to this archetype. So yeah, I'm pretty confident in Cleric of Life's Bond. Okay, speaking of gaining life, we're going to talk about Kazandu Nectarpot. So Kazandu Nectarpot is kind of a different variant on like the whole Grayson Gladeheart, Jadi Offshoot kind of thing. Jadi Offshoot was a 1 mana 0/3, but you gain 2 life. This one is a 2 mana 1/3, but you only gain 1 life. So this is definitely worse than Jadi Offshoot, because generally Jadi Offshoot you wanted to just block as soon as possible, and getting 2 life per land is a lot better. This does still discourage blockers, and will probably gain you an average of like 1 or 2 life, right? So this is actually pretty comparable to Skyclave Cleric. It's definitely not like It's definitely not a it's definitely not a main deckable card, but I could definitely see this as a sideboard card in whatever deck, as long as like aggro is a thing. And I'm giving it a long shot for sure still, because it's not necessarily good enough to be a sideboard slot. Depends on what else is available, but I think that it's pretty close. Yeah. Okay, so next up is going to be Nighthawk Scavenger. So this is hilarious. This card is absolutely nuts. Is of course a callback to the OG Vampire Nighthawk. Loved by some, hated by many more from the OG Zendikar. I think that this card is bonkers. I'm giving it a sure thing, at least for standard. I think that it's a bit dicier for Eternal formats, given that it always has 3 toughness. So the fact that it dies Lightning Bolt just automatically means it's kind of hard to run this in Modern. But in standard, there's plenty of incidental milling available. And we all know that you don't even have to be playing graveyard stuff to enable a card like Tarmogoyf, right? So just playing Magic will buff this up to at least like 2 or 3 toughness, 2 or 3 power, in which case it is going to be a better Vampire Nighthawk. I think if you are running enough milling effects to make this on average a 4/3, this is going to be a very insane card. The problem is like how many opponents' decks will be running like maybe just creatures and lands, or what have you. It might be a little hard to say. The fact that Uro exists also makes this a lot worse. I'm still giving this card a sure thing because I just think it's very good in a vacuum, and there's also a relevant creature type that kind of supports it. So maybe you run this as like your rogue for your party deck, or maybe you're just a rogue deck, or maybe you're just a deck that has swamps and you just want to play a good creature. Yeah, I'm a fan of this for standard. Okay, next card is going to be, speaking of referencing OG Zendikar, we have a sweet reprint in Lotus Cobra. Lotus Cobra was insanely hyped as like the chase mythic of the set when Zendikar came out, and now it is being reprinted as a rare, which is blows my mind a little bit. But I think that Lotus Cobra is absolutely the real deal. Fabled Passage is in standard, so you can still do the fetch thing. It's not as easy to do as when the actual fetch lines are in standard, but we make do. There's also Roiling Regrowth, there's Azusa, there's Cultivate, so there's plenty of ways to go off with this. Even if you're not going off with Lotus Cobra, it's still like a good ramp creature. It still will allow you to cast a War Drop on turn 3. I think this is a sure thing. We all know how powerful Lotus Cobra is. It's worse in a format without fetch lands, but it is definitely not bad. And I expect this to be getting killed on turn 2 a lot, because if you don't kill it, you're going to be quite behind. And you also risk your opponent doing something ridiculous. Alright. So next up we're going to talk about Shatterskull Minotaur. I think this is a long shot. I think the problem with this card is that it is only good when you've already achieved the party. If you're casting this for 3 or less mana, it is definitely very good. But even for 4 mana, I would not alter my deck in such a way that like you need this, because there's already another option for like a similar slot in black-red, and if you're running red in your party deck, you're probably also running black. We'll talk about that card later. I think that this card is fine, and maybe you want like 2 copies of it, but the problem is if you get a hand with like 3 of these, and you're running 4 of it in your deck, it's not very good. You're not going to be able to get the party off in time. So I'm giving it a long shot. Yeah. Okay. Next up is going to be Spikefield Hazard. So I think this is another card that I think people may underestimate. The number of times where you just need 1 damage for 1 mana is actually like pretty high, but the problem is that card is often useless in a lot of other situations. So it's very risk reward card, right? If you guys remember Gutshot, Gutshot was an insane card, and yes, that format had a lot of targets that you really wanted to Gutshot. But like, I think that adding the MDFC part makes this a very, very valuable inclusion. I am pretty confident that this card will see standard play, so I'm giving it a sure thing. I think that the exile clause is also relevant. There's plenty of recursive stuff like Uro, Speculative Shade, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, I'm giving this a sure thing. Okay, next up is going to be Akum Hellhound. So Akum Hellhound, it's red step links. Not only that, but it has a relevant creature type. It is a dog, so if you're running your pack leader deck, this is a great one drop for pack leader. Probably the best one drop dog now. Actually, was there a one drop dog before? I don't even remember. But so not only that, it is obviously step links is weaker because we don't have fetches. I keep mentioning this, but there's still enough landfall support, especially given the inclusion of MTFCs, that you can reliably attack with this as a 2/3 every turn. So 1 mana 2/3, good enough to see play. I think this card is going to be really good for your red X aggro decks, whether it's mono red or red white or whatever. So giving this a sure thing. I'm a fan of a Akum Hellhound. Let's go to the next card. Okay. Next up is Tajuru Paragon. So this is one of the this is the other one that we're going to talk about where it's it fills every single slot in your party. Now I think that this card is actually a really, really big reason to be running green in your party deck, even though there aren't actually any party payoffs in green. It is a 2 mana 3/2, so that's already reasonable aggressive stats. But the fact that you can just play this on turn 2, and then whatever your curve ended up looking like, you're probably going to be able to hit party 3 fairly easily, because this will count for whatever you want. Not only that, it also has kicker, and the kicker version is also a very good card. Dropping this for 5 mana, and getting to find anything in the top 6 that shares a type with it, so you can find any cleric, any rogue, any warrior, any wizard. That is really good value to potentially get off of your 2-drop. And remember that a card like Kabu Titan, that card was a standard all-star back in the day, and all it was either a Grizzly Bear or a 5 mana 5/5. So this is a 2 mana 3/2 or a 5 mana 3/2 that draws you a card. I think this card is very, very good, even if you're not playing a party deck per se. Even if you're just playing like a green deck that has a bunch of warriors, this card is very good. So I'm definitely very high on this. I'm giving it a sure thing. I think it is good enough to potentially see play in Pioneer. I wouldn't say Modern because 5 mana is pretty hard to hit in Modern, and a 2 mana 3/2 is not that great. So when you can play stuff like Tarmogoyf. So I still think that Pioneer is the limit for this card, but I do think it is a very good card for Standard and Pioneer. Okay. Next up, we're going to be talking about Fireblade Charger. So this card is we've been talking about the Warrior deck a little bit. This is a great one-drop for the Warrior deck. It's great with your equipment. You can drop this later on in the game and play this in a Maul to get a solid 4 mana 3/3 haste creature with flying. The kicker is that this is also just a better Goblin Arsonist. Being able to drop this on 1, and then when it dies, it'll automatically deal at least 1 damage. But if you have ways to buff it, it's going to be even bigger. So I think you can run this in Red-Black Sacrifice with some Ember Cleaves. You can run this in Red-Green with some Ember Cleaves. You can run this in Red-White and go the full equipment package. I think there's plenty of ways to do some cool stuff with this card. It's a warrior, so you maybe run this in your party decks. Probably not, but maybe. I definitely would give this... Oh, one more thing. It is a goblin, which is important because in that... when I talked about Kargan War Leader, I talked about a Winota deck that runs a lot of warriors, and also, having a non-human warrior here is very important because that means that it's a 1-drop that can trigger your Winota, is also a warrior, so it gets buffed by the Kargan Lord. So there's plenty of synergy with this card, just in a lot of already existing archetypes. So I'm giving this a sure thing. I think it's fine on its own and synergizes well with a lot of cards in Standard. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about Akiri, Fearless Voyager. Speaking of warriors and equipment, all that schnaz. Akiri, it's red-white card draw, which is something that you don't get very often, right? So that's something you want to consider. It is non-human for helping with Winota. I think that the second ability is kind of relevant. in that, like, protecting from, it makes it easier to swing with your creatures in too. So I do think that this card is good, but the problem is we don't have enough equipment to make me think like, okay, this is always going to be on, and it's not very good if you actually don't have any equipment around. I'm looking for my cards to be like already fine, even if you don't have equipment, and like something like Fireblade Charger fit that bill better. So I think you can build the Akiri deck, but the problem is a lot of the equipment is not very strong. So I think we need a little more equipment before she'll be good. That's why I'm giving her a long shot for now, but I think she's she could definitely be very good in Standard with enough support. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about Agadeem's Awakening. So this is, I believe, the second worst Bolt land. So we're ramping up here. This effect is definitely good in the right deck. The problem is, what is the right deck? How often is the right deck going to get to the situation where you have, the perfect straight of converting mana costs to return back? For 6 mana, returning a 1, 2, and 3 is definitely very good, but like, how likely is that going to happen? Maybe in Clerics, maybe in some sort of like sacrifice deck. But then you also have the cost of running the the Bolt land in your deck as opposed to like a regular land. So I feel like this card is good, but I'm not convinced that there's a shell that can use this efficiently. Which is why I'm gonna give it a long shot. I don't feel super confident that this card will find a home, but if there's a home, this should be a pretty solid card. Okay. Next up, we got Legion Angel. So this card. Let me tell you, this card is sick. White does not usually get this kind of card advantage, and to get something like this on a creature that is efficiently costed, has evasion, is a big freaking deal. I also love the design of this card because the better the card is, the fewer of it you can run in your deck, right? And there's areas and reasons why you might want to run each split. So, for example, if you're running 4 of this card in your deck, you're a moron. Never do that. If you're running 3 of this card in your deck, what this means is that you're an aggressive deck that wants to be able to hit, in most games, you want to be able to hit, okay, turn 4, I have a 4-drop, and then I can play another 4-drop next turn. But you're not expecting to necessarily, play a 4-drop every turn because you're looking to have the game more or less over by that point. The other thing is, in a mid-range deck, this is a solid 2 of, because that means whatever, the first one you draw, it's going to be able to get you 2 more. And in a control deck, I could see running this as a 1-3 split, because you'll be able to find that one copy if the game is longer and you have card draw and stuff like that. And once you do find that one copy, you can play 4 over the course of a game. So I do really love this card. There are different strategies where this will fit in well, and overall, I just feel like this card is very, very strong for Standard. I could even see this in Modern. It feels unlikely, because dropping a 4-3 for 4 in Modern is just not a good play by itself, and it's like, okay, you want to lock yourself into doing that 4 times? Doesn't seem great, but... And, it's worth pointing out that this does take up some sideboard slots, so there's a cost associated with you doing this kind of thing. But I think at least for Standard, this card should be an all-star. It's also worth noting it's a warrior, which is relevant for your warrior archetype or your party deck or whatever have you. Overall, though, super sweet card for Standard. Yeah. Okay, so next card is going to be Emiria's Call. So this is another Bolt land. I believe this is the second best Bolt land. It is guaranteed to give you 8 power and toughness of flying creatures for 7 mana, which is fine. It also will make your other creatures indestructible, meaning that if you're running this in some kind of aggressive deck, in place of lands, this is basically saying, okay, I have a land, it'll bolt me, I don't care, right? I'm an aggro deck. And then if I happen to flat out get to 7 mana, well, now I can just do this and swing whatever creatures I have on board for free. I can make 2 4/4 flyers to close out the game. If you're control deck, it's like, okay, I can run a couple of these lands, or I can run a couple of these finishers. That can also be lands for me if I need them to. So overall, I feel like this card will fit in very well in multiple archetypes. I'm giving it a sure thing. I think it's quite solid. Okay, so the next card is going to be Skyclave Shade. So this card is a bit shady, pun intended. It is not Bloodcast. The obvious comparison is Bloodcast. You do have to cast it, so you have to pay 2 mana to get it back, and it's not guaranteed because you do need to be hitting the land drop to get it back. The plus side is you can cast it for 5 and have it come in as a 5/3, and it does have an extra power of Bloodcast. So all those things considered, I'm giving this a sure thing because I still think this should be a very strong card for Standard. But if you're trying to include this in your Dredge deck, no, it's not going to be in your Dredge deck. I do definitely like this for Standard, though. If you're an aggressive black deck, it scales well into the late game. It comes back. It's recursive. I'm a fan of it overall. Yeah, and if you're playing in the counters deck too, like you can, this also fits in pretty well in the counters deck because you can put counters on it as an aggressive creature. You can have it come back and it'll have counters, and like it'll fit in with all your synergies there. Cool. All right. Next card is going to be Glasspool Mimic. Where this card shines is definitely party strategies. If you curve out a couple non-rogue creatures and play this on turn 3, this will get you another strong party creature, but just, not a rogue. But it is a rogue, right? So having this fit into your party strategy is great. And, being able to be a land is fine. The problem is I don't think party decks will really want the extra tap land that much because they want to curve out. And I don't think that slower decks will really want the clone as much. Where I do see this being good is in kind of like Sultai ramp decks that have creatures with like good ETBs. And that's fine because that means you have a good land to play that can also sometimes be a clone. Overall, I think this card is a long shot just because I'm not sure if those decks have room for an effect like this. But if you are cutting like maybe a couple lands for this kind of thing, then I could see it being pretty solid. So overall, I'll give it a long shot, but I think I could easily see it showing up. So, all right, we are getting pretty close. I'm almost done with my list. Let's power through. Okay, so next up is going to be Oran Reef Ooze. This card is a sure thing. Oran Reef Ooze is really sweet. There are 2 modes, right? You can either play it as a 3/3, or you can play it as a 2/2 that immediately buffs one of your other creatures. Even if you're not doing the +1/+1 counters thing, this coming down as a 3/3 and then swinging in as a 4/4 and then a 5/5, like that is a fine rate for an aggressive deck. Cards like Yorvo kind of compare to this in that case, but there's the other scenario where you're playing a +1/+1 counters deck, and this card is like the single best card in your deck because it can immediately buff one of your other creatures. Every time you attack with it, it'll buff your whole team. The problem is that it's kind of competing with the Grakmaw at 3 mana. But I definitely think like if you're playing a Swarm Shambler in your deck, you want some number of Oran Reef Ooze too. Maybe you go like 4 Oran Reef Ooze, 2 Grakmaw, something like that. I can see that. Next up, we're going to pick up on Soaring Thought Thief. We talked earlier about the whole Uro thing, right? And this is the payoff for playing your Rogues deck. I think in a vacuum, this card is very, very good. Coming down as a 1/3 flash flyer is very solid. Being able to block small creatures, it can, very easily incidentally mill your opponent by just attacking. You can play it on turn 2 and attack with your 1-drop and mills 2. When you hit the threshold of your opponent having 8 or more cards, now you can. It's a 2/3. It buffs your whole team. The problem is that Uro screws over the strategy really hard, so it's kind of a matter of like, okay, how much Uro is there? Do we have a good strategy to beat Uro if our rogue milling plan doesn't work? If not, then maybe like this isn't really a deck that'll actually have impact in Standard. I do think that if there's a meta shift or after rotation or Uro gets banned, this is a good deck in a vacuum, and this is the card that like will make that deck good. So I will still give this card a sure thing. I think that deck will probably show up at some point as a solid Standard force. Feels like the kind of thing Watsy would push, but for right now I'm a little concerned. Okay, Jewelry Disruption. This card is sweet. Censor obviously is the comparison. And so I think overall Censor is a better card than Jewelry Disruption because Censor, you can hold it up and then choose to cycle it if your opponent doesn't cast anything. Jewelry Disruption, you have to choose to play the land then, and then if your opponent plays the spell that you can Force Spike, it's like, well, I already played the land, so like tough break, right? I'm still giving this sure thing because we don't have Censor, we have Jewelry Disruption. 2 mana for a Force Spike is playable in a lot of cases, and the fact that you can just play it as a land is fine. The problem is that like they're both bad in the late game. So whereas Censor is a fine draw in the late game because you can cycle it for 1 mana, oftentimes you don't really want to have a Force Spike, and you also don't want to play your 9th land. So that is what makes me concerned about it a little bit. I think if you're running this in control, you probably want to be cutting a couple lands for it for that reason, or like treating it as a land that can also be a Force Spike instead of like a Force Spike that can also be land, if that makes any sense. I still think that this is a fine card for Standard though. Should show up for sure. Okay, so the next card is like one of the most bizarre cards I've ever seen, and it's Angel of Destiny. So it's like, okay, you're hitting them, but they immediately gain their life back, and then you also gain that much life, right? So like basically it's a way of saying like your creatures have lifelink, but they don't actually do any damage to your opponent. And yeah, it's got like double strike, sure. So if you buff this, it's gonna heal you for more. Essentially, what this does is it makes your life total the only one that matters because you can essentially kill your opponent by gaining 15 life instead of dealing 20 damage to them. Given the amount of life gain we have in the format with cards like Heliod, this is something you can realistically achieve. But I think that if you're planning on dropping your 5-drop while also having a high life total, that's something you can't really count on if there are efficient aggro decks in the format. And this doesn't really do anything to like close out the game quickly by itself. By itself, in a vacuum, you have to hit them 4 times and not take any damage yourself to kill them. And you could do that with a creature that just has 5 power, you know? And you don't care about how much damage you've taken. So I think that overall this card is pretty weak. I'm going to give it a long shot. But maybe if there's enough support for it, I could be proven wrong. Okay, next card is going to be Jace Mirror Mage. So this card I read about 5 times when I first saw it. I love this card. After thinking about it a lot, I think that this will be a very, very strong Standard card. And the reasons are a couple things. First of all, given that you have something like Koralhelm Chronicler, running kicker cards that are also just good cards by themselves helps a lot with that and makes for a very good solid mid-range blue shell. This card is also just very good in control because you can drop it on 3 +1. Even if you just scry 2 every turn, like that is a solid card to play on 3 mana. And if you scry 2 and then your opponent sends 5 damage at it, that's pretty close to gain 5 life draw card, which is like fine for 3 mana, right? But the upside is also if you drop this for 5 mana, what you can do is either you can plus the clone to put a land on top of your deck and then draw a card with the other Jace. You can just scry 4 if you want. You can draw 2 cards and just like sack the clone. Like you can plus Jace to put a land on top of your deck and then draw the land to ensure the clone doesn't die. There's a lot of stuff you can do with this card, and it synergizes really well with all of the kicker stuff. But you don't even have to do that. Like I think this card is just really good in control. And so like also there aren't really any 3 mana planeswalkers left in the format, I believe. So having this to fill that slot is very important. And it can be a 3-mana Planeswalker, or it can be a good 5-drop. So that's why I just think this card is really, really good. I think it's going to be a very solid standard card, and you should not underestimate 3-mana Planeswalkers, especially if they can get card advantage and card selection. Yeah, so this is just a sweet card. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about Turntimber Symbiosis. This is, I believe, the 3rd best Volt land. I think 7 mana is a lot, but if your deck has big creatures to hit, it can be worth it. The good part is that even if you don't hit a creature that's very big, like if you hit a creature with CMC 3, it comes with 3 +1/+1 counters, so it'll still be a very solid play. Green decks also have a lot of uses for lands, so I think that generally you'll run this card if you want to cast Turntimber Symbiosis, and there are plenty of green decks that would want to do that, right? But then you also this will help you run those expensive cards, because you can more easily run this as okay, now my deck technically has 28 lands in it because I'm running 3 of this, and I feel like that's very valuable. Again, as we said before, the whole Bolt land thing is not a big deck building cost, because overall, if you run a couple of these cards in your deck, it's okay, whatever. It's not going to, as long as you're not bolting yourself every turn, bolting yourself one time is usually not that big a deal, especially when you can play land tapped if you need to. Okay, so the next card is going to be Maraza Sproutling, which is another kicker payoff. It's a 3-mana 3/3, and so that's not constructed playable by itself. For 5 mana, you can make it a 5-mana 3/3, or so for 2 extra kicker, you can make it a 5-mana 3/3 that returns a kicker card from your graveyard to your hand. This can return itself, so if you have 4 of these in your deck, you're probably going to be looping these a lot, which is cool. You can also return stuff like Jace, you can return stuff like Seagate Stormcaller, you can return your Blood Chief's Thirst, you can return, I'm pretty sure there was one other good spell. Well, the point is, we've already gone over a lot of kicker spells that are good enough to play already. And if you happen to be playing a kicker deck, I think you definitely want this card in it. If you're playing the Vine Gecko deck, I don't think if you're playing, this card doesn't really seem like a Roost of Drakes card to me, because Roost of Drakes probably wants the cheaper kicker effects overall, and maybe doesn't even want to be green, honestly. But I think so I'm giving this a long shot, but I could definitely see it being pretty solid. Okay, I'm going to move on to the best Bolt land in the set, and that is Shatterskull Smashing. So if you're red, this is the most likely card that you don't care about bolting yourself, because red decks are overwhelmingly going to be aggressive. If you are hitting this card for 5 or more mana, it is totally fine to pay 5 mana to deal 3 damage to a creature, right? It's totally fine. It's obviously not a busted effect, but I think many red deck wins decks will just be running 4 of these, because in place of lands, because if you're running red deck wins, you don't care about bolting yourself most of the time, unless it's the mirror. In which case you can play 2 of these, and it's fine. And then when you hit if you happen to flood out and you hit one of these cards off the top of your deck, or you draw it when you're already on 4 mana and you're well, I might as well save it, right? Being able to potentially just kill something with 4 toughness, when it didn't cost you anything to run the card in your deck. It's a land that sometimes just kills something with 4 toughness. It could even kill 2 things with 2 toughness if you flat out hit 6 mana. If you're playing a red-green ramp deck, right? This is not only a land for your red-green ramp deck. this can totally wipe your opponent's board if you get to 8 mana, which is not that hard to do in this format. I think this card is absolutely insane for Standard. I'm giving it a sure thing. I think that the amount of times you'll be able to use this to have a meaningful impact on the board is very high, and the deck building cost is so low that I'm very, very confident in this. Okay. Move on to Feed the Swarm. So yeah, we got our black enchantment removal. It's also just flexible. It can be a Vendetta, right? Vendetta is a card that has seen Standard play in the past. For 2 mana, Vendetta is bad, right? It is bad. You can just play Heartless Act, and it's a much better card than Vendetta. But the fact that this also kills enchantments means that in some metas, your black deck that doesn't have access to white or green might need this card, right? There might be an enchantment that you need to kill. So having an enchantment removal that also can kill creatures, it's pretty solid. I think this is a sure thing. I think this will see play in sideboards. Potentially main decks, but that seems unlikely. But, stranger things have happened. Okay. We're going to move on to Deliberate. We already know this effect is good for 2 mana because Omen of the Sea exists. Omen of the Sea is very good. Omen of the Sea is rarely sacked for scrying, so really it just depends whether you care about the enchantment part or maybe you care about running instances and sorceries. So you can copy this with Seagate Stormcaller. You can have this count for your Magmatic Channeler. You can use this to trigger Kaza, or you can discount this with Kaza. You can use this to trigger Mara Mystic. So it feels like this is like a Wizard's card, and then most other decks will probably run Omen of the Sea. Deliberate is definitely not bad. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about Balagate Recovery. So I'm actually a pretty big fan of this card. I think that Balagate Recovery, 3 mana for regrowth is already fine. We've already seen Recollect seen play in old standards, and obviously Recollect probably wouldn't see play now, but the fact that your regrowth can also be a land is really important. I'm going to give this a sure thing. I think this will see play in Bant Ramp decks, possibly green-red, green-black mid-range decks. Who knows? Especially since all the Golgari recursion stuff rotated out. So, yeah. Okay, next up is going to be Skyclave Apparition. So I think Skyclave Apparition is definitely a very, very interesting card. There's a lot of tricks you can do with this. First of all, the fact that it can hit any non-land permanent is really, really helpful. Yes, it has to have converted mana cost 4 or less, but it's also a creature. And given that it has this, the same sort of, it doesn't use it until it leaves the battlefield technology, because it can't. You can do things like sack it in response. You can do things like return it to your hand in response. So those tricks are on the table. Also, usually if you're killing a non-creature permanent, you're more than fine with them having a 4/4, right? Because whatever you're killing is probably more stronger than a 4/4 if it had CMC 4. This deals with Uro as well. That's another thing to keep your eyes on. Finally, if you're running a deck that has bounce effects, this is very good to just run out. Okay, they kill it, whatever, they get their 3/3. You can just bounce their 3/3. If your deck, I think this is something that you run in Control. It's something that you run in mid range. It's something that you might run in Modern. In your Pod deck, is going to just permanently get rid of their Uro. In Legacy, maybe even want to kill their Oko, and it still kills Uro in Legacy too. So I think that this card just does a lot. Very, very, very sweet card. Okay, so next up we're going to do Nimble Trap Finder. Alright, so Nimble Trap Finder, I think this card is a long shot. I think that if you're looking for party enablers, you can do better than this. Yes, if you have a full party, this card is insane. Getting the Coastal Piracy effect on a 2-mana 2/1 is really, really good. But just having a 2-mana 2/1 unblockable, and it's kind of conditional unblockable is a lot weaker. So I think that if you're doing the party deck, maybe you run this, but it's definitely not like the all-star of the deck. So I'm giving a long shot because I can see this being cut for sure. Okay, next up we're going to talk about Zagreus, Thief of Heartbeats. So this is a very strong party enabler. This is the reason to be in black-red for a party if you are doing that, because we talked about the Skyclave, or we talked about the Shatter Skull Minotaur before. This is pretty much just better than that because yes, it has 1 less power, but it has flying and it has Death Touch. So the flying is the biggest part because being able to dodge past blockers is really good. You could potentially play this for like 2 or 3 mana by turn 4 or 5, which is really, really good because you can couple that with a removal spell or another creature or whatever, right? It also gives your other creatures Death Touch, which is really important because that means that your other creatures can also attack with it. And if you're playing this kind of curve out snowball style, this is what you want to have at the top of your curve. Being able to kill planeswalkers is fine. Like, you still have to send a creature at the planeswalker anyway, so most of the time that isn't going to be a big deal. But it is nice that if your opponent has, say, an Ugin that they just played and plussed, you can just play this guy and one-shot the Ugin. So that's cool. Nice upside. Overall, I think this card is a sure thing. I think that the black-red party deck should be pretty solid. Maybe even you're going like Mardu party with Winota. Yeah, I'm a fan of this. Okay. We actually have 3 cards left. Isn't that crazy? Next up is going to be Hagra Mauling. It's a murder. That's also a land, right? So ignore the basic land text at first. This card is standard playable without the basic land text. 4 mana for a removal spell is not great, but is playable. It can't kill planeswalkers, yes, but having your you can there's a lot of modal value from running the MDFC. So being able to play this as a land when you need it, or just having the removal spell if a bit overcosted is fine. If your opponent doesn't have any basic lands, then it's just murder, right? Which is a card that has seen standard play, albeit very little standard play in the past. I think that it's rather unlikely in the next, like after rotation, for people to have no basic lands, just because the pathways are not exactly like the kind of cards that allow you to run 3-color decks well, and those decks will definitely have fewer basic lands. So I think if you're running this in Pioneer, I actually feel like that's the best home for it, because Pioneer has access to all those Shocklands and stuff. And it's also slow enough that something like this could work. But if you're running this in like Modern, I think there's just better removal. And the tapped land is not enough of an incentive. So I think the sweet spot is a format like Pioneer, but this card is also very good in Standard. Okay, we got 2 left. Next up is going to be Thieving Skydiver. So this card is pretty hilarious. This card is a sure thing. I think that it's a great rogue for your rogue deck. It's great for your party deck. It's great for your kicker deck. It fits all those quantities. It fits in all 3 of those like kind of categories. It can just be a good 2-drop, right, with evasion. And we already talked earlier about how like we have a 2-drop that sort of has evasion. This just has evasion, right? So I think this is already a better 2-drop rogue than Trap Finder. Not only that, having this be able to steal artifacts can be very valuable in older formats. So in Modern, say this is also a Merfolk. So say you want to run this in like your Modern Merfolk sideboard. Being able to drop this and steal a random artifact can actually be very valuable in some matchups. Even in Legacy Merfolk, like taking someone's Labe is not it's not negligible. That can really shut off some of their mana options, you know? And I think that the fact that it also has evasion means this is just a very flexible card that does a lot of things, has relevant creature types. I'm a big fan of this card. I'm giving it a sure thing. I think it'll definitely show up somewhere. Okay, last card. Oh yeah, Royal Eruption. So this is a Lightning Strike, sorcery speed. How much do we value the kicker to make us want a lightning strike at sorcery speed. I think we don't value the kicker enough in constructed. And the reason is that I think the 8 mana is a pretty big drawback to want to run this over something else that can either be a more efficient removal spell like Thundering Rebuke, or just some other burn that can maybe be instant speed, because that does add a lot of play to it. I think if you do want to run this, it would be in Green-Red Ramp, because Green-Red Ramp can use the sorcery speed removal well. Usually you don't really care that much about the instant speed because you're green deck, and then you also can realistically hit the 8 mana to deal 5 damage. So I think this card is fine, but I think for standard it's a little too weak. But I can also see this being wrong. I can see this being a great standard card, honestly. My hunch is that it's not that great, though. Okay, so I believe that is it for my constructed section of the review. I am going to give my top 10 list, just in terms of like cards that I like the most from Zendikar Rising. This is not like a power level thing at all. And then that'll be the end of the video. So thank you guys for watching so far. Alright, so we're going to count down my favorite cards in the set. And first up is going to be Tangled Florahedron. First of all, I love the art on this guy. It is just so cute. Second of all, I love elementals, and I also love mana. And I love mana dorks. So I love this card. Just does two things that are kind of in the same vein, and it's just like I think it's really the perfect mana dork for a lot of ramp decks, because yes, like it is not the best mana dork on turn 2, but it still can allow you to drop a land if you don't actually have the mana to play the mana dork. And if you're curving out just fine, maybe you don't need it, maybe you just drop it as a land drop. So I think it's going to be very useful for a lot of ramp decks. I love it. Number 9 is going to be Agent of Acquisitions. I love the artwork on this. I just think like the artist did a phenomenal job. I don't remember the artist off the top of my head, and I'm not looking at the card right now, but I still think Agent of Acquisitions, really sweet card. I think it's also just a very, very powerful Ravenous Wrath variant, both in and out of party decks, and I'm excited to play with it. Number 8 is going to be Thundering Rebuke. I was a big Lava Coil fan, so I'm happy to see a Lava Coil variant again. As I said before, I think this one is better than Lava Coil. Being able to hit Planeswalkers is a big deal. I love me some just like efficient uncommon removal, seeing play in standard, so I really hope this one takes off. Big fan of Thundering Rebuke. Number 7 is going to be Jace Mirror Mage. I love the play you get out of this Jace. It's got its own like little mini games built into it. It's very powerful, great 3-drop, great 5-drop. I think that it'll reward skilled players a lot, because generally scrying rewards skilled players, but then having like 2 different planeswalkers that can both, have their scries and draws interact, like really, really, really cool card. Number 6 is going to be Kazanu Mammoth. I think this is the best MDFC card, probably. Just being able to drop this on turn 3 and swing with the 5/5 return, maybe even swing with the 7/7, or just have it be a land if you need a land. So I really love this card. Number 5 is going to be Archpriest of Iona. I think that this is the party payoff you really need if you're running party. This card is just phenomenal. Being able to attack as a 2/2, potentially even, like a 5/3 flyer if you build your deck right, is crazy. And I really want to see how maybe Modern Humans decks incorporate this, because that might mean they go for some really interesting card choices. So I'm really excited to see that. Number 4 is going to be Legion Angel. I love all the deck building decisions that this makes. It kind of turns your deck building into a mini game of like what you really expect to get out of this Legion Angel, and it gives white card advantage in a way that it really hasn't ever before. Like, yes, Squadron Hawk has been a thing, but like this is a very unique take on Squadron Hawk, so I'm very happy to see this card show up. I'm a big fan. I think it'll be very interesting. Number 3 is going to be Seagate Stormcaller. I look forward to seeing the haters proven wrong on this card. I think it's going to be very good. I'm excited to see the dichotomy of where you want Snapcaster Mage and where you want Seagate Stormcaller. And I think that in games where you do actually get to kick this, like that's going to be pretty hype. Maybe lightning bolting someone for 9. Like I'm all about that. So very excited to see that. Number 2 is going to be Nighthawk Scavenger. As Zendikar was like the first set that came out after I started playing, Vampire Nighthawk holds a spot very near and dear to my heart. So I'm very happy to see a Nighthawk riff. And this is basically just a better Nighthawk in almost all cases. I'm excited to be able to play with like a card that's basically a better Vampire Nighthawk in Standard again. And I really hope maybe it can even show up in some older formats, you know? I mean, as long as Uro is terrorizing stuff, maybe not, but I'm a big fan. And finally, number 1 is going to be Bloodchief's Thirst. I'm so excited for Bloodchief's Thirst. I think that this card is fantastic in all formats. And it is really nice to have like a Fatal Push variant that can actually just, you know, it doesn't require you to build your deck in any way. It doesn't require you, it just requires you to be able to hit 4 mana sometimes, but it's also just a very good 1 mana spell. And I really love like just having like really nice efficient removal to put in my decks, because it's like, okay, you know, it's kind of comforting to know that you can always like start with that as a baseline for your deck, and you know it's going to be good. And it'll really be nice to get to play with a Fatal Push variant in Standard again. Yeah, so thank you all for watching through that entire, well, if you did watch through the entire thing, thank you. If you watched part of it, also thank you. I really appreciate it. In the future, I'm looking forward to making videos not only on new Magic sets coming out, but also on some of the custom sets that are made by the MSE community. So some sets that I'm looking to review in the future are hopefully Cajun's Monsters of Chikyu, Hersey's Barton's Journal, Mako's Alara, and Canterbury Eggs Dark Seas of Shirian. But if anyone has any other complete sets that they'd like me to review, please let me know in the comments or on Discord or whatever. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch. So thank you very much. Have a great day. If you are in one of the areas on the West Coast that's affected by the smoke, please stay safe. Many areas, not even N95 mask will help you. So keep that in mind. Don't go outside unless you absolutely have to. Cool. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you.